Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of the people who watch these videos aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this kind of content, consider hitting the subscribe button. It really helps a lot, and it keeps these long stories going. Also, I'd love to hear from you. What time is it right now where you are, and which city are you listening from tonight? And if these stories help you sleep, feel free to tap the thanks button to support the channel. It truly means a lot. Alright, let's get into it. I flicked the light switch and the room flared to life in harsh white. The fluorescent tubes overhead rattled like an old engine, and the single bulb above the metal table buzzed insistently. Rain pounded the window behind me, a brittle curtain that blurred the alley's dumpsters into gray streaks. I sat down, pulling my chair so close the legs scraped against the linoleum. He was already there, a thin man in a nylon windbreaker, head bowed, hands flat on the table. The cuffs in front of him, locked in place but not yet clicked, caught the glare and threw back pinpoints of light. I cleared my throat, but my words stuck in my throat like gravel. "Name's Detective Harris," I said finally. My voice sounded tight, unnatural. "Thanks for coming down." He lifted his head. Mid-30s, hollowed cheeks, black hair matted at the temples. His eyes skirted mine, looking past me at the door. He swallowed. I'd read his file twice on the ride over. Arrested on suspicion of murdering his landlord. Found standing over a body with a knife dripping something dark. No confession, no witnesses. Only the landlord's blood. I reached for the file folder in front of me. It felt lightweight, flimsy, just papers. But inside were fingerprint, statements, autopsy photos. I flipped it open. The first page slid free. A copy of the landlord's eviction notice, stapled at the top. I stared at the gray print, then at his face. "William Archer?" I asked, voice softer now, like I was talking to a kid. He nodded once, eyes locked on the folder. A bead of sweat traced his temple. "Your neighbor called it in," I said. "Gunshot heard at 2:15 in the morning." He swallowed again. "It wasn't." The words hovered between us. I leaned forward, folded my hands. The hum of the lights pressed down. The clock on the far wall ticked. Tick, tick. I tapped my finger once, tick. I tapped again, tick. "What do you remember?" I asked. Archer's eyes flicked to the window, to the rain. "I remember the landlord banging on my door," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. Angry, said I was late on rent. He closed his eyes. He came in anyway. I told him to leave. I glanced at the eviction notice. Late rent, 2 months. But eviction alone doesn't kill a man. "He had a pistol," Archer said. He pulled it from his waistband. He opened his eyes. I thought he was going to shoot me. I bit the inside of my cheek, fighting a memory. A year ago, a domestic call. Man with a pistol in the hall. He never fired, but the fear you see in someone holding a gun at you is different. Even now, that fear can make you do things. I forced my face still. "So, you grabbed the kitchen knife," I said. "You heard the shot go off upstairs." He nodded, voice low. The barrel kicked against my chest. I tapped the table. "1 shot? 2. Second time?" His hands twitched. He raised the gun again. I studied him. Cold drop of sweat slid over his jaw. He was telling me every word, except the part that really mattered. I slid the folder aside. "Show me." He hesitated, then pulled back his sleeve. A thin white scar ran from wrist to elbow, half-healed. Knife steel gives a clean line. The landlord's report mentioned a slash defensive wound. Archer's wound looked too neat. I leaned back, letting him see how close he was to freedom or further hell. "He shot you twice at point-blank range." He closed his eyes again. He hated me. I tapped my pen. Why? He opened his eyes. For a moment he looked ancient, older than 30, older than the peeling paint on these walls. Because he knew I saw her. I froze. Who? Archer's voice dropped so low I had to lean in. Her, he repeated. Drifting behind me in the hall, she stood there. The rain outside hammered harder. I pressed my knuckles into the table. Who? Archer's throat bobbed. My daughter. My heart skidded. He had a daughter, no mention. I forced myself calm. Your daughter? How old? 5. I pulled my flashlight from my pocket, clicked it on. The beam sliced the opposite wall into a rectangle of light. Archer shrugged on his jacket, sleeves trailing water. She ran out of the apartment. I chased her into the hallway. He was there. His face twisted. A man reliving something terrible. He kicked me down the stairs. I blacked out. I clicked the light off. Blackout. He nodded, voice hollow. Next thing I knew, I was crouched over him, knife in hand, screaming. I leaned forward until the bridge of my nose nearly touched the table. Your daughter, what happened to her? He closed his eyes, whispered, She never came back. The bulb above us flickered, buzzing louder. My chest tightened. A child lost in a hallway. A father found over a body. Doesn't add up. And the wound on Archer's arm, too clean for a scuffle. Something was missing. Something he wouldn't say. I stood, grabbing my raincoat from the hook. We need to check something, I said. The words felt hollow in my ears. He put on the jacket, rainwater dripping onto the linoleum. Where? I didn't answer. I motioned him up from the table. He rose, cuffs clicking shut this time. I locked them. He didn't protest. Together, we stepped into the corridor, the flickering lights, the distant clack of a printer, the smell of stale coffee. I led him to the stairwell, chest tight as the walls closed in. At the first landing, I pointed. Look. On the wall was a smear, half-dried blood smeared by a hand. At the bottom, we found footprints in dust, tiny, bare, 5 toes. He stared. His breath came in shallow gasps. Before he could finish, I heard something low and rhythmic above us. A soft tapping, like fingernails on metal. I reached for my flashlight again, clicking it on. The beam showed another smear. Blood droplets running along the edge of the vent cover. My hand shook. Archer's eyes met mine, fear pooling like rainwater in his pupils. I knew I should call backup, but something deeper tugged. An officer's instinct, or maybe something darker. I reached up and pried open the vent. The metal was slick, cold. Inside, just darkness, until a small shape shifted beyond the beam. His voice trembled. It's her. I swallowed, heart pounding, and slid the flashlight deeper into the shaft. The distant clink of metal echoed back. Then, a soft, almost inaudible sob, and I wondered if we were both too late. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before sliding the flashlight deeper into the vent. The metal walls pressed in, slick with condensation. I could feel the distant hum of the precinct's air system vibrating through my knuckles. The beam revealed a narrow corridor of sheet metal, the edges sharp enough to tear skin. Archer's breathing rattled behind me, shallow and uneven, as if he were waiting for me to fail. A sob echoed again, soft, achingly small. It came from somewhere further in, beyond arm's reach. I wiped rainwater from the back of my hand and steadied the light. The beam danced along the ductwork, picking out smudges of dirt and rust, but nothing that looked like footprints. A fresh drip of water hit my wrist, cold. I kept inching forward, the metal scraping my sleeve with every inch. My heart hammered, each beat pounding in my ears louder than the rain outside. Then I saw it. A strand of blonde hair, plastered to the edge of a rivet. I froze. That hair, fine, almost white in the flashlight glow, could only belong to a child. My breath caught. I reached for my radio, thumb hovering over the button, but I fought the urge. If I called it in now, I'd lose a precious moment. I forced myself to stay calm, to think like an officer, quiet, deliberate, controlled. I inched forward again, hand trailing along the bottom of the duct. My fingers brushed something soft. I flicked the light down. A tattered cuff of pink fabric, the seam torn cleanly. A sweatshirt. The same sweatshirt Archer described. My chest tightened. I caught a whiff of something. Milk, maybe yogurt. Sour, sweet, and tangy, clinging to the fabric. I straightened and pressed the flat of my palm against the ceiling, pushing myself forward. Archer's voice whispered through the open vent behind me, so low I almost didn't register it. She's scared. It wasn't a question. He knew. I could hear the collapse of shame in that one admission. I pressed on, each shift of weight sending a tremor through the metal. The corridor sloped gently downward. It must run above the intake shafts, following the building's perimeter. I remembered the blueprints, a branch near the lobby, another toward the holding cells. This path, though, led toward the newer wing, closer to the administrative offices. That's where we'd forgotten to seal off a remnant vent years ago after the renovations. Another sob, closer now, cracked like a dropped glass. My heart seized. I eased the light forward, careful to keep my body low. Ahead, I saw a flicker, a movement, a shadow that didn't belong. I paused, counted a second, then another. The sob broke again, a single breathy cry, and then silence. The fluorescent buzz above felt miles away. The air was stale here, heavy with dust, and the faint stench of sweat and old smoke. My flashlight beam caught a smear on the duct's floor, something dark and sticky. Blood. I swallowed hard. It trailed farther down, thinning into droplets that led deeper into the shaft. "Detective?" Archer's voice trembled through the metal. "Are you okay?" I pressed my free hand against the vent wall. "Stay there," I rasped back, though I wasn't sure he could hear me clearly. He had no right to follow. I'd asked him to wait. He eyed me like I might vanish. I took 2 more careful steps. The sobbing resumed, low and ragged, drawing me on. I stopped at a seam in the duct. The rivets here were looser. I could pry the panel free. I reached for the small multi-tool clipped inside my jacket, forgotten there from an earlier case. My fingers found the pliers. I clipped the rivets one by one, each pop sounding unnaturally loud in the tight metal box. Panel loose, I eased it open. Light from the interrogation room spilled in, illuminating a narrow niche just big enough for a child to curl into. I slid my hand inside, fingertips brushing against something soft. A small hand, pale, translucent skin, trembling. I closed my eyes and forced my breath steady. "Easy," I whispered, even though I wasn't talking to myself. I unholstered my pistol and tucked it at my waist beneath my coat. I reached in slowly, expecting nails to claw at me, expecting a scream. Instead, the hand flexed, clutching at my finger like a drowning person grabbing a life ring. I drew her out gently. She was bundled in the torn sweatshirt, knees tucked to her chest. Her blonde hair was matted. Her face, when she finally lifted it, was streaked with mud and tears. Her eyes were huge, glassy, 2 pools of something broken. I braced her weight, felt her small body tremble through my arm. Then Archer's face appeared above me, pale as chalk. I guided the girl into my arms. She clung to me, child instincts against a stranger's chest. The weight of her soaked jumper pressed into my coat. She didn't cry. She stared at me, eyes unblinking, mouth set in a firm line. I wondered if she'd stopped believing in adults long ago. I crouched where the panel lay open, rainwater dripping from the edges. Archer's voice came through again. "My daughter?" He knelt beside me, cuffs rattling. His lips trembled. "It is her." I didn't answer. Instead, I brushed a lock of hair from the girl's forehead. The smell of shampoo, lavender, made my throat tighten. I looked around the duct. No sign of anything else, no hiding places. Just the two of us in this metal artery, miles underground of a sleeping precinct. "You'll be okay," I told her softly, though I wasn't sure I believed it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Backup finally responding. A voice asking what I needed. I slipped it out, thumb hovering over the screen, but I didn't call them. I couldn't tear my gaze from her face. She blinked once, then lowered her head. The weight of her small body in my arms felt like truth itself. Cold, undeniable, larger than any file or statement. Archer cleared his throat. "I tried to save her," he said, voice raw. "But his throat closed. He looked away, shame pressing his shoulders down. "Who?" I demanded, though the question felt hollow. We both knew there was someone else in this room, someone I hadn't booked, someone who wasn't in any report. He swallowed, eyes raw. "The landlord, he cut off. He stared at the girl, face twisting. He took her from me. Rain drummed against the window so loudly it drowned out my thoughts. I stood, shifting the girl to one arm. Archer scrambled up behind me, cuffed hands raised vaguely at his chest. "Let me," he said, voice cracking. He reached toward her, but I held out my free hand to stop him. His eyes filled with tears. Please." I closed my eyes, chest tight. The interrogation room behind me felt miles away. The rain kept falling. I realized I couldn't trust my own instincts, not yet. Not when everything in me screamed to believe him. Before I could decide, the girl lifted her head and stared at Archer. Her pale blue eyes burned with something I'd never seen in a child so small. Accusation. She pointed at him with a trembling finger, then shook her head sharply, as if to say, "No." The single gesture echoed in the metal box like a verdict rendered. Archer's lips quivered. He looked from the girl to me, seeking permission, seeking absolution. I wanted to demand answers, but something in her silence cut deeper. I pressed the child closer and slid the vent panel shut with my foot, trapping us in a moment that would never end. I took one step back, light flooding the shaft, and held her against the storm of questions rising in my mind. Archer sank to his knees, head bowed. The rain and the hum and the buzz coalesced into a single truth I couldn't name. I lifted the girl to my chest and walked out into the corridor, the vent panel clicking shut behind me. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, the stale air rushing past. Archer remained on the floor, hands curled into fists, as if bracing for something impossible. I carried the girl across the hall and set her down on a bench. She sat still, small fists clenched in her lap. I knelt in front of her. Her eyes found mine. That same refusal to be comforted. I stood, holstered my gun, and turned to Archer. He was still kneeling, staring at the vent grate. I realized I had never heard him cry. Not in the files, not at his booking, not across this table. But now he did, his shoulders shaking as hot tears slid down his cheeks. I reached out, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. The sudden contact made him flinch, then lean into it. That flinch, his only admission of being human, hit me harder than any confession. I looked out the window at the storm. Then back to the two broken bodies on my floor. A man who swore he saved his daughter, and a girl who denied his salvation. The hum of the precinct seemed distant, irrelevant. Outside, the rain painted the alley in streaks of silver and black. I knelt again, beside Archer, beside the girl. The echoes of her sob still lingered, and the unanswered question tumbled in my mind. Which of them was telling the truth? And in the hush that followed, I realized that some answers don't come with sirens or rush of boots. They come in the quiet moments, in the rooms no one checks, and they follow you home like a second skin, torn, damp, impossible to ignore. I left Archer kneeling beside the bench and turned toward the door that led back into the main corridor. The rain had slowed to a steady tapping, like fingers drumming on a coffin lid. Somewhere in the station, the mugger from last night was yelling for his lawyer, and the radio crackled with the dispatch operator's clipped voice. But all that felt distant now, ghost noise behind the narrow focus on the girl's pale face. She sat perfectly still, legs dangling just above the scuffed linoleum, hands folded in her lap. Her eyes tracked me as I crossed the room, and I felt a jolt of something I hadn't registered since my first shift. Raw exposure. I knelt again, careful not to jostle my gun belt or the keys jangling at my hip. Rainwater dripped from my jacket onto the floor. I brushed it away, then offered her a small paper cup of lukewarm water. She accepted it without speaking, sipping slowly as though it would burn her throat. "Hey," I said, voice soft. "You're safe now. I'm Detective Harris." My throat was tight enough to cut with a knife. Her lip trembled, but she didn't smile. Instead, she tilted her head, as if examining me for threats. I realized then how I must look to her. A stranger in uniform, bright badge, gunmetal, the authority she once feared now her protector. My heart trembled. Most nights, I could slide into this role without thinking. Questions, cuffing, paperwork, end of story. But tonight, this child, her world so small and fragile, it all contracted around that bench like a vice. I glanced at Archer. He'd slumped back against the wall, knees drawn up, head resting on his forearms. His jacket lay in a puddle beneath him. He looked gutted, no anger left, just emptiness. I swallowed and stood. "You'll be okay," I told the girl again, more firmly this time, though I doubted it. I turned and jogged down the corridor toward the medical bay, leaving her and Archer behind, their shadows merging beneath the harsh strip lights. Inside the bay, the on-call nurse looked up in surprise. Her eyes flicked from me to the damp coat in my arms to the blood-stained vent cover propped against the wall. "Detective?" she said, relief mingling with alarm. "What happened out there?" I set the girl gently on the examination table. She didn't resist. She sat with her hands on her thighs, eyes refusing to close. I knelt beside her. "Name?" I asked. She blinked twice, then spoke in a whisper. "Madeline." I nodded. "Madeline, this is Nurse Ortiz. She's going to check you over, okay? I'll sit right here." I offered a glance over my shoulder at Archer as he stumbled in behind me, escorted by a uniformed officer who'd just arrived. Archer's eyes met mine, raw hope, pleading, but I turned back to Madeline. Nurse Ortiz latched the little curtain and started a routine check. Temperature, pulse, listening for injuries hidden beneath the shirt. I watched Madeline's cheeks hollower than I'd expect for a 5-year-old, and her small arms unmarked. No sign of the panic she must have felt squeezed inside that vent. I glanced at Archer as Ortiz noted the boy's jacket stains and the dried trickle along its sleeve. Archer's face crumpled. He leaned against a counter, one hand pressed to his mouth, silent tears brimming. Ortiz looked up. "She's fine. Aside from mild dehydration and maybe a frost nip from being in that vent so long." No fractures, no lacerations besides a scratch on her knee. Kids are resilient, but she needs food and rest. I exhaled, cap in throat. Thank you. Ortiz nodded and handed me a small blanket. I draped it over Madeline's shoulders. As she tucked her chin, cold and tiny, I asked, "Where does she live, nurse?" Ortiz checked a clipboard. Temporary shelter. Her mother dropped her off days ago. Claimed she had an emergency. Aunt in Arizona. Didn't give contact info, case opened yesterday. She frowned, then turned back to me. That's not in the report yet. I closed my eyes. That meant Madeline had been here before tonight. In this precinct, and no one asked where she belonged. It meant she arrived as a stray child, nameless, without roots, and now Archer's daughter. The puzzle pieces slid across one another, messy. I opened my eyes and swallowed. We'll fix that. Ortiz left to fetch juice and crackers. I stood, facing Archer, who'd slumped on a stretcher bench. He looked at me, confusion mixing with relief. I gestured for him to join me. He eased himself down beside me, careful of the cuffs. I unclicked them. Standard procedure in the medical bay, and he rubbed his wrists. I'm sorry, he said, voice small. All I wanted was to keep her safe. His eyes glistened. I thought she was safe. I studied him. His voice sounded like a cracked whip. Why did you hide her in the vent? He swallowed, rubbed the stubble on his jaw. I heard him coming back. He followed us down the hall. I tried to run with her, but he grabbed her backpack, dragged us both back. He burned her arm with the barrel's heat, told me I'd never leave with her. His breath came in short bursts. So, I had to hide her. I swallowed, nodding slowly. You thought no one would check the vents. He looked down, eyes fixed on the scuffed tile. I thought, if she stayed hidden, maybe I could get her to the car, drive her away, find help. He closed his eyes. But I lost her. I lost her in the vent. My chest tightened. Archer's admission landed on both of us. Owner, criminal, parent, man undone. I felt the pull of a question at the back of my mind. Did he deserve to be here, kneeling on this bench, facing charges? Or was there another man to blame who'd never been booked? The landlord's file. Gun ownership, evictions, neighbor complaints. But no record of violent tendencies, no record of a wife, no record of a child sighting, no record of dragging a girl by her backpack. Ortiz returned with juice and crackers. Madeline sipped with a curious tilt of her head, then accepted a graham cracker and nibbled. Her eyes were slow pools, dark with fatigue. I handed her a small teddy bear from the supply cabinet, a crumpled, once white bear with one eye missing. She hugged it, pressing it to her cheek, then looked back at Archer. Another silent moment passed, thick as sludge. I cleared my throat. We need to get her records, your records, everything. But right now, she needs a place to stay. I reached into my coat and pulled out my phone. I know someone in social services. I'll call them personally. Archer's head snapped up. No, he said. She belongs with me. I winced at the desperation in his voice. You can't have custody until we sort this legally, but I'll tell them you want her. Right now, she needs a doctor's clearance, a room to sleep in, someone to monitor her. He closed his eyes, hand covering his face. I watched the rise and fall of his shoulders. The grout lines on the floor looked punishing, cruel, unmoving, like judgment written in cement. No one spoke as the rain picked up again, drumming on the skylight above the bay. Madeline took another bite, then licked crumbs from her fingers. She stared at Archer as though she recognized him, then turned to me and asked, in a voice so small I almost didn't hear it, "Detective Harris, I knelt at eye level, heart pounding. "Yes, sweetheart?" She lifted the bear's stump of an ear to me. "He's the bad one, right?" Everything in me caught fire. I forced my face calm. I glanced at Archer, his face slack, his eyes unreadable. I swallowed. Social services would want to know exactly what happened, but I wasn't ready to parse out the truth in that moment. The girl looked at me, serious beyond her years, waiting for the verdict. I took a breath. "We're going to figure that out together," I said softly. "But right now, you're safe, okay?" She nodded once, then turned back to her crackers. The hush settled in again, heavy and fragile. Archer stayed on the bench, silent tears tracing new lines along his cheeks. Somewhere in the station, someone yelled for a paramedic. The radio spat static. The rain's new tempo, a steady drum roll, beat through the skylight. I rose, swallowing the questions pounding my skull. Who tried to harm her? Who was telling the truth? I wanted to believe Archer's remorse. I wanted to believe I'd saved her, but I'd waited too many nights for neat endings only to find I'd slaughtered them with my own hands in the dark. I looked down at the girl, at the teddy bear pressed to her chest, at the grated vent cover lying like a tomb marker in the corner. The blades of light from the ceiling cast shadows that danced across her face, shifting with every second. And as I stepped back, heart hammering, I knew I'd never stop hearing that sob, never stop wondering which one of us would break first. Him, under the weight of his guilt, her, under the weight of his betrayal, or me, under the weight of knowing the truth might never set anyone free. The hum of the lights stuttered, and I wondered if it would ever stop. I stepped back into the hallway, leaving Nurse Ortiz to her work, and Archer pressed against the cold tile, tears carving narrow rivers down his cheeks. The station's corridors spread before me like a maze of gray linoleum and peeling paint. The fluorescent lights overhead buzz in stuttering rhythms, casting long shadows that reach into corners where secrets hide. I stay crouched by the bench where Madeline clutches her patched-up teddy bear, its single glass eye reflecting the harsh glare. Every muscle in me is tense, every nerve ending pulsing, because I know that somewhere behind these walls, someone planned all of this, and I haven't yet pieced together who or why. Archer's confession rang hollow. He hid his daughter to save her, but he couldn't explain how the landlord ended up in the morgue, or how a little girl wound up trapped in a vent. Everything he said held a half-truth, a shard of reality mixed with something darker that he wouldn't or couldn't reveal. I glance at Madeline's small form. Her blonde hair hangs in damp strands, and she watches me through lashes coated with dried tears. I kneel and brush a crumb of cracker from her sleeve. "Okay," I whisper, though I'm not sure to whom I'm talking, her, Archer, or myself. "We need answers." She tilts her head, eyes searching mine. Her voice is small but clear. "Detective Harris?" I nod. My throat tightens. "Yes, sweetheart." She looks back toward the vent cover in the corner, as if its metal grill holds all the answers. Then she looks at Archer, still slumped on the bench. "He left me," she says. No accusation, just fact. A cold knot forms in my gut. I want to force Archer to stand, to look at her, to see the damage he's caused, but I also know that no amount of shouting will rewrite what happened. I stand slowly, wincing at the weight in my back. I retrieve my phone from my pocket, text from dispatch. "You okay? Back up en route." I ignore it. This one's mine. Pushing off from the wall, I take Madeline's hand. She stands, small and fragile, and follows me. Archer stays kneeling, head bowed. I lead her down the corridor, past the booking area, past the public waiting room where the fluorescent tubes have been replaced by daylight bulbs. Everything seems too normal, too clean. No sign of the horror that played out just moments ago. We reach the stairwell I used earlier, the one with the vent leading to the lobby intake. I pause at the top of the stairs, the smell of urine and stale coffee hitting us. Madeline grips my hand tighter. I crouch by the vent grill, now securely fastened. The cabinet of papers and folders stands nearby. Evidence logs, shift reports, the eviction notice. Everything that tells pieces of the story sits here, waiting. I crouch and unscrew the grill again. Madeline stays close, peering into the darkness. I shine my light inside. Only blackness greets us. I swallow. I need to know if someone else came through here, I say. Someone besides your dad. She blinks up at me. He came back, she whispers. My heart hammers. I close my eyes, reciting questions I should have asked hours ago. Where were you before the window broke? Who else knew you were there? How did you end up alone at midnight? When did you stop believing your dad would protect you? I slide the vent panel off and push it aside. Then I reach in and trace the duct walls. No signs of forced entry here. Just Archer's sweat and dirt, and that single smear of blood from where someone had clutched the metal. Then, faint but unmistakable, a groove along the seam. A fingernail scored the metal when someone crawled out. A handprint in dust beyond. Small fingers, a narrow palm. Not Madeline's. She's too small to leave a full print there. I linger on the print, tracing the curve of the fingers with my fingertip. Whoever came here did so precisely, deliberately, and not just once. I wipe my hand on my coat and look down at Madeline. She shivers. Rainwater drips through a crack overhead, plinking on her shoulder. I realize she's been silent for minutes. Are you cold? I ask. She shakes her head, eyes fixed on the duct. No, she says. He was here. I close my eyes. I'd thought the landlord was the only other person besides Archer and me. But now, I'm not sure which story is true. Archer said one thing, Madeline another. But the evidence conspired with neither. The vent prints belonged to someone else. Someone who could fit only a small frame, but older, perhaps, than a 5-year-old. I stand, heart thundering, and twirl my light toward the stairwell. The echo of our footsteps pulses off the walls. Madeline's grip on my hand tightens, and I realize she's holding on to me with the belief that I won't let go. But I've started to slip too, into questions I can't answer, into a doubt that's more suffocating than the vent's close metal walls. We emerge into the lobby. The lights here are softer, wide fluorescent panels that make the space feel public, like a bank or a DMV. A security camera swivels above the reception desk, its tiny red light blinking. I move to the desk and pick up a logbook. It lists arrivals and departures for this wing, but only employees and caseworkers. No visitors logged for after hours. I lower the book and look at the empty chairs. Somewhere past those windows, the alley glows yellow under street lamps. Beyond that, the city moves on. People on their way home, oblivious to the nightmare tunneling beneath their feet. A click behind me. I spin. Archer stands at the top of the stairs, head held high, cuffs still around his wrists. But his stance is different, solid, resolute. His face is set in a grim mask. You need to know the rest, he says, voice low and steady. He steps forward, despite the cuffs. I couldn't say it before. I didn't think anyone would believe me. I swallow, breathing hard. My flashlight beam trembles. Show me, I say. He nods and pulls the cuffs free with a practiced motion. I must have left the latch unlocked. His hands drop to his sides. I tighten my grip on my own gun, even though it's unlikely I'll need it. But every instinct fires. Trust no one. Expect betrayal. Archer steps to the reception desk and leans in. In a harsh whisper, he says, "It wasn't just me and the landlord." My pulse spikes. Who else? He hesitates, and the clock overhead ticks. The hollow echo feels like an accusation. Archer lowers his voice. "The bail bondsman." My head snaps up. The bondsman, a middle-aged man named Dempsey, had keys to the building, access after hours, familiar with the floor plans. He'd visited Archer the week before, a courtesy call about bail payments. He left empty-handed. The report was sparse. Bondsman consulted. No details. "Dempsey?" I hiss. Archer nods. "He followed me upstairs," he says. "He said he wanted to talk terms. When he arrived, he saw Madeline. That's when he hurt her." I tighten my jaw. "Why?" Archer's shoulders slump. "Money," he says. "He told me he could get me out, get her back, but only if I paid him. But when I refused, he lost it. He shot at me. I dove. I can't process the words. The betrayal, the greed, the cruelty. A bondsman exploiting a child. My stomach cramps. I stare at the ledger on the desk. No mention of Dempsey or his after-hours visit. He'd covered it up. He'd used his access to harm a child, then walked away like a goddamn professional. My teeth grind. Where is he now? Archer closes his eyes. He slipped out through the maintenance hatch back into the ducts, he says. He knew them better than anyone. He slipped right through and out. Blood thunders through my ears. I feel the weight of every step I've taken tonight. The broken window call, the interrogation room, the crawling through vents, the bench, the medical bay. Each piece of the puzzle had hidden another betrayal. I whirl, shoving the logbook aside. Security footage. I dash to the reception terminal and pull up the cameras. The lobby cam cycles through angles. Front door, hallway, records room. No vents. But then I find it. A feed from the maintenance camera in the duct shaft. Grainy, black and white, flickering. There, something moves. A bulky shape writhing through the vent, dragging something small. I pause it. The shape has a clipped tie and light shirt sleeves. Bondsman attire. He's wrapped Madeline's blanket around her like a package. I shut the feed off with a click. My hands shake. Archer's face hovers above me, gaunt. "You see?" he says. "He took her and left. I only found her when I heard her crying." I nod, voice catching. Dempsey's still out there. He could be anywhere. Madeline tugs at my sleeve. I kneel. She holds out the teddy bear. One glass eye missing. The other eye is wide, unblinking. "He was bad," she says. Her certainty cuts me deeper than any bullet. I stand, sliding the terminal screen off. "Get her to safety," I ordered the officer behind me, who's been hovering at the door. "And find Dempsey. Now." The officer nods and scoops up Madeline. She clings to the bear, nodding once, then disappears down the hall. I lock eyes with Archer. "You told me." He exhales, relief and guilt mingling. "I tried." I pull out my phone and dial dispatch. "This is Detective Harris, Code 12. Child endangered by bondsman Dempsey. Last seen entering the ducts near the lobby. Send units, notify SWAT, and wake up the camera tech. He'll need to track every inch." I end the call and tuck the phone away. The hum of the station feels distant. I step outside the lobby's sliding doors into the small vestibule. Rain falls in sheets against the glass. My reflection smears in the wet. I lean my forehead against the cold pane, breathing hard. Somewhere out there, Dempsey is moving through the maze of vents and service shafts, with a frightened girl and a bear missing an eye. And I, detective, father figure, burdened officer, am left with the fragments of truth, chasing phantoms in a building designed to keep people in, not out. I close my eyes and whisper to the rain, Please let me find her before he does. Then I step back inside, the doors swishing shut, and the station returns with static hum, the distant radio chatter, the echo of footsteps on linoleum. But those walls, those vents, hold secrets that will never be exorcised. And every time it rains, I'll hear the drip of blood and birth of betrayal ricochet in my ears, reminding me that the most horrifying crimes aren't the ones we write down. They're the ones we bury in the dark. And I still haven't decided who needs saving most, her, him, or myself. I shake the vestibule's paneled wall, steel against my knuckles, and force myself back toward the duct entrance. Each footstep echoes in my skull. The hum of the station's fluorescent lights hangs like judgment as I flip my flashlight on again and descend the stairs. Rainwater drips from my coat, splattering my boots. The vent grill waits, iron cold and implicating. I peel it off and slip inside without hesitation. The metal corridor closes around me, slick, claustrophobic. Every rivet a reminder that I'm deep underground, chasing a fugitive and a frightened child through a maze I can barely draw on the back of an envelope. My breath fogs the beam's edge. Every exhale tastes of stale air and remorse. Somewhere behind me, the station's public address crackles. Units converge on lobby vents, tactical team to downtown intake. I don't answer. I can't trust that they'll move fast enough or in the right direction. Archer's confession rings in my ears. Dempsey knows these shafts better than anyone. He planned every step, every corner. I crawl forward, pressing my forehead against the damp sheet metal when the duct slopes at a sharp angle. My flashlight catches fresh scratches, long gouges in the steel like someone's fingernails raking across. I pause, chest constricting. I push on, following the gouges deeper into the tunnel. Water drips overhead. The only sound is my own heartbeat and the faint ratcheting of the station's pumps. Up ahead, I see a dark stain on the floor. Old blood, cracked and dry around the edges, mixed with fresh drops that glisten red in my beam. I kneel and trace a droplet's path with my gloved finger. It was a woman's size, thin, delicate. Then another clue. A scrap of fabric stuck in a seam, rough denim weave, too coarse for a child's clothing. Dempsey must have torn his pocket as he moved her. My mind flashes back to Archer's voicemail from 2 nights ago, voicemail I never listened to until after the arrest. His voice panicked. They took her. I don't know where. Please, you've got to help me. Then nothing. I shoved my phone in my coat and left him to the cells. Now I crawl through his plea, chasing scraps of truth. A distant metallic echo, the tap of boots somewhere behind a grate. I freeze. My flashlight beam wavers. I whisper aloud, though I know no one can hear beyond the metal. Stay with me, kids, stay close. I crawl on, crawling over a fold in the duct where someone has wedged a maintenance box aside. Inside, I glimpse orange wiring and coils of duct tape. Then a shape at the edge of the light. I pause for a breath so shallow I don't disturb the tunnel's hush. Madeline? I murmur. No answer. But I spot a scuff mark on the floor where someone has scraped past, barely an inch wide. I rise to one knee and shine the light at floor level. There, small footprints pressed into the dust. 5 toes, 5 again, leading around a bend. I follow them. Another bend, another turn, and then I see it. A cuffed handprint on the ceiling. Smudged iron oxide color. Someone reached up, possibly injured, and clung to the duct. The print ends at a weld. I lean forward, hand against the metal. A tremor runs through me. Ahead, I hear muffled sobbing, low and steady. My pulse spikes. I slip out of the duct onto a landing. The shaft opens into a narrow service alcove behind a locked maintenance door. Ajar now, creaking slightly. I press my back to the wall and swallow hard, listening as the sobs continue. I push the door wider and step into a narrow room lined with pipes and valves. The walls sweat in the hush. On the floor lies a bundle, a small figure huddled inside a blood-stained jacket. The jacket bears the bondsman's logo pressed in black on the chest. I kneel and part the bundle. Madeline blinks up at me, tear tracks dark against her pale cheeks. She clutches her teddy bear, one glass eye glinting. Her small frame trembles. I scoop her into my arms, feeling every rib beneath her ripped sweatshirt. She presses her face into my chest, wet and trustless. Behind me, a movement. Dempsey emerges from the shadows, pistol drawn, expression ice cold. He's pressed against the opposite wall, forehead resting on the pipework, hands trembling with rage and fear. "Don't," he croaks. I hold Madeline tighter. "Let her go," I say. My voice is steady. Years of interrogations taught me to speak calm when everything else is spinning. He raises the pistol, barrel splintering the flicker of my flashlight. "She's mine," he says, rage and desperation intertwined. I shift so Madeline's small head is shielded by my shoulder. I slide one hand to my duty belt. "You don't want to do this, Dempsey." His breath comes ragged, pistol wavering. "You don't understand. This is payment." I latch eyes on him. My flashlight's reflection dances in his sweat. "Payment? She's a child." He snarls, and I see he's been to hell, a man broken by his own sins. "He owes me," Dempsey says. "He thought he could get away without paying." My mind fires. Archer's bail balance, the threats, the phone calls in the parking lot, the bondsman's leverage, enough to bind a man to his mistake. Dempsey had pulled Madeline into his world of threat to force payment. I take a step forward. "Let her go now," I repeat. He presses the pistol tighter, knuckles white. The valve above him leaks water, drips echoing like bullets dropping. Madeline stirs, sniffles. She lifts her head, tiny face streaked, eyes locked on Dempsey. Tension coils. I watch Dempsey's finger twitch on the trigger. Then, with a crack like a snapped bone, the pistol fires. I yank Madeline to the floor. The shot misses me by inches, splintering the pipes overhead. Water hisses down the wall. I roll onto my side, hand on my gun, but I don't fire. Not yet. Dempsey stumbles, pistol raised at my chest. His jaw trembles. I can't. Madeline crawls out from under my arm, teddy bear held above her head. She stands, small but unwavering, and points at him. "Bad," she says. The single word resonates, echoing in the tiny chamber. Dempsey's pistol shakes. His eyes shift from me to her. He drops the gun with a clatter, stumbling back. I spring up, kicking the pistol across the floor and cover him as Madeline scrambles into my arms. She buries her face in my shoulder, shaking. My heart pounds so hard I can taste it. Dempsey sinks to his knees, hands up, tears slicking his cheeks. He looks at Madeline, then at me. "I'm sorry," he whispers. I press the barrel of my revolver lightly against his chest. "You should be." Sirens erupt down the shaft, officers' boots clanging on metal. Flashlight beams slice into the service alcove. I lower my gun and hold the frightened girl tight. Archer's face appears at the alcove's entrance, eyes wide with relief and guilt. The tactical team floods in, handcuffs ready. I stand, hands shaking, and nod to the senior sergeant. "Got him." They secure Dempsey, drag him upright. He doesn't resist. As they lead him away, he turns and mouths, "Please watch her." I nod. Words fail me. I turn back to Madeline. She looks up, eyes red but alert. She tugs at my coat. "Detective Harris?" I swallow. "Yeah?" She lifts the teddy bear's good eye to me. "Thank you." I kneel and hug her close, careful not to jostle her. In the chaos of the shaft, the dripping pipes, the roar of approaching backup, the rattling cuffs, her simple gratitude feels like the only truth. As they lead me out, arms around Archer and Nurse Ortiz arriving to tend to scraped knees and bruises, I realize the day will end with reports, testimonies, a cascade of paperwork. But none of it will capture the collapse of fear in a little girl's eyes, or the bitter gravity of chasing monsters through darkness. Outside, the rain has lightened to a mist. I carry Madeline out of the station into the cold dawn. The city yawns awake, horns, footsteps, distant chatter. She burrows deeper into my coat, small and safe. I look back at the station, its vents and walls silent now, secrets sealed once more. And I know the aftershocks will never stop. The echo of that shot, the gasp of the vent, and the memory of a child's single word. The truth isn't in the files, it's in the spaces where no one listens. I step into the morning light, rain mist on my face, and wonder which of us will carry this horror home, and which of us will forget first. I carry Madeline out of the alcove where the tactical team swarmed in, their boots clattering on metal walkways, their voices low but urgent. The echo shuddered off the walls, but in my mind, everything quieted down to a single, steady pulse, the weight of her in my arms, the warm dampness of her hair against my chest, her small breathing finally even. They shepherded Dempsey out behind me, cuffs heavy at his wrists, his face drenched in tears that mingled with the blood he'd lost when the pistol cracked overhead. But I didn't look back. I led Madeline down the stairwell, each step taking me closer to daylight, farther from the shock of gunfire and betrayal. Outside, the rain had turned to a lingering mist that clung to the precinct's front entrance. The morning light was pale, washed out, silver dripped from the eaves, the concrete still dark from the night storm. I stepped onto the slick sidewalk, boots splashing shallow puddles. Madeline curled into my shoulder, her bear tucked beneath my arm. She smelled like lavender and something faintly metallic, copper from her own scraped knee, maybe. I paused, looked around for the social worker who'd promised to meet us here, but there was only the empty street and the slow hiss of traffic. I cleared my throat, voice rasping. "Madeline," I said, though I wasn't sure she'd respond. She tilted her head against my coat, eyes closed. "We need to get you somewhere safe," I murmured. Her fingers curled in my shirt. I realized then that the small hand under my lapel was the only anchor I still had. Without her, I felt unmoored, nothing but adrenaline and questions swirling in my gut. A dark sedan pulled up beside the curb. Its tires whispered on wet pavement. The passenger door opened, and a woman in plain clothes stepped out. Her coat cinched at the waist, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. "Detective Harris," she said crisply, not quite hiding relief. "I'm Valerie Chen, Child Services." I handed Madeline to her gently. The girl clung to my neck, wrapping her arms around me. "Can you stay with her?" I asked, voice low. Valerie dipped her chin. "Yes. We've arranged a foster placement down the street, a temporary one. She'll have a warm bed and breakfast." She looked down at Madeline, who sniffled once, then nodded, as if she understood exactly what was happening. I watched as Valerie scooped Madeline into her arms, careful, like she might break if handled too roughly. Madeline's arms wrapped around Valerie's neck. The social worker's eyes flicked back to me. "Thank you, Detective," she said. Then, almost under her breath, "You did good." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. I turned away and walked toward the station steps, each footfall heavy like I was wading through molasses. Inside, the sergeant met me in the lobby, a stocky man with permanent worry lines etched near his eyes. He put a hand on my shoulder. Harris, everyone's accounted for. Archer's in the holding cell, clean of immediate charge besides the original homicide. Dempsey's booked for kidnapping and attempted murder. Madeline's with Chen. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle. The orphan file awaiting Madeline's name. Archer's file still unsorted. Dempsey's fingerprints already logged. None of it captured the way I felt, brain dead, hollow, like I'd been pulled through a machine and spit out the other side. Good, I said, voice barely above a whisper. The sergeant gave a curt nod and walked off. I sank onto a bench in the booking area, facing the one-way glass that separated the waiting room from the midst of chaos we'd barely overcome. Through it, I saw Archer's reflection, a gaunt silhouette, head down, shoulders slumped. I wondered if he'd finally sleep tonight, or if the image of his daughter's face pressed into the vent walls would haunt him as it did me. A buzzer sounded. The clerk slid a folder under the glass slot. I reached for it. Madeline's name scribbled on top in thick black marker. Inside, adoption paperwork, medical reports, photographs. One photo, Madeline in a pink coat, smiling on a playground bench, teddy bear in hand. I stared at that image, at the eyes full of laughter. Then I looked at her now, so small, so quiet. I tucked the folder under my arm and stood. I walked through the open office door into the records room, a cramped space where file cabinets crowded every available inch. I found Archer's file, pulled it out, and flipped to the notes from last night's arrest. Notes that said nothing about a child, nothing about the landlord's odd behavior, nothing about the bondsman's clandestine visit, just the basics. Suspect named, charges read, rights waived. I closed the file and found the maintenance logs. Dempsey had a keycard log, entry at 1:12 a.m., exit at 1:45 a.m. That window matched Archer's timeline, matched Madeline's hiding. But the camera footage I'd pulled from the duct maintenance cam was marked camera malfunction. The logs said no footage available. I ran a finger along the file's edge. Corruption or oversight? Cover-up or incompetence? The question burned at me. I forced myself to breathe. The files didn't lie. They hid. I replaced Archer's file and stepped out into the bullpen where officers sat behind computer screens, blinking in fluorescent glare. The hum of keyboards, the low murmur of voices felt alien now. It was all so ordinary, a coffee mug tipped on one desk, crime scene photos pinned on a corkboard, shift schedules taped to the wall. I wondered how many other horrors lurked behind those everyday surfaces. My phone vibrated. A text from Valerie Chen. Madeline is asleep. She asked for Teddy. She's safe. I exhaled a long breath. The first real one since I arrived at that broken window. I typed back, "Thank you." Then I locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket. One of the detectives looked up at me. "Harris, ready for the debrief?" He gestured toward the conference room. I nodded once, squarely, and followed him down the hallway. Each step echoed. The afterimage of every footstep through the vents, every creak of the interrogation room table, every drip of blood that stained the duct. The walls pressed in, but I kept walking. In the conference room, the sergeant, the DA's liaison, and several officers waited around a table strewn with maps and diagrams of the precinct's vent system. They looked up as I entered. The DA's rep cleared her throat. "Detective Harris, can you walk us through what happened?" She flipped on a projector, displaying a grainy screenshot of Dempsey in the vent. The image flickered. I took in the room, the polished table, the clinical chairs, the dry erase board marked with bullet points. This was where we'd document the narrative, the official story. But my mind rose against it. resisting tidy lines. I sighed. It started with an abandoned building call, I said, voice steadying as I spoke. But it ended here inside our own station. The bondsman used his access to kidnap a child. My suspect, Archer, led us to Madeline. I tracked them through the ducts, confronted Dempsey, and recovered her just before the shot came. Heads nodded, pens scribbled. That was the skeleton. But I knew the flesh was missing. The tremor in Archer's admission, the silent plea in Madeline's single word. I knew the music between the notes, the truth in what remained unspoken. The DA's rep glanced at me. "Any outstanding leads?" she asked. I paused. "Yes," I said. My voice echoed in the hush. Why did the precinct's log show no entry by Dempsey, who disabled the camera? And how many other cases have we closed without looking through the vents? My gaze swept the room. We need a full review. The room fell silent. The hum of the projector felt deafening. Then the sergeant nodded slowly. Agreed. I swallowed. The official narrative would be written, the reports filed. But I knew the real stories would live in the quiet, etched in memory, rattling through sleepless nights. I closed my eyes, feeling the press of the ceiling tile above me, the hum of the lights, the distant tick of an unseen clock. When I opened them, I looked at the people around the table, their faces lit by the projector's glow, determined but unsettled. They'd carry the burden now, too. I exhaled, tilting my head back, until the buzz of the lights became white noise. Then I said, "Meeting's adjourned." My voice was low, heavy. I stood, leaned one hand on the table, and walked toward the door. Each step felt like leaving a piece of myself behind. My guilt, my doubts, the child's whisper. As I reached the threshold, I glanced back at the flickering image on the screen. Madeline's small figure, wrapped in a jacket, flashlight beam on her face. The world would see that image, file it away, and move on. But I knew that image would follow me home, through every dark room, every dripping vent, every rain-soaked night. And I realized the debt I owed, to Madeline, to Archer, to myself, was far from settled. The silence between the questions still screamed in my mind. I stepped out, the door swinging shut behind me with a soft click, leaving the conference room's light behind. In the dim hallway, I paused, hand on the knob of my office door. The precinct's hum was my soundtrack, the aftershocks of every interrogation etched in my spine. I opened the door, flipped on my desk lamp, and sat down, hands trembling as I typed, "Draft narrative, vent rescue, Dempsey confession, precinct review." Then I stared at the blank space on my screen, the place where truth would finally take shape. My phone buzzed again, another text from Chen. "She asks for you." I stared at the message. Madeline. In that simple line, I felt the pull of a final question, one I'd been too afraid to ask all night. I exhaled, closed my eyes, and typed back, "Give me 10 minutes." Then I shut down my computer, rose, and walked out into the corridor. The lights hummed. The walls loomed. And somewhere, in the dark, I heard the faint drip of water, like a heartbeat, reminding me that some cases never end. They only change shape. I pedaled down the hallway toward the social services office. Each footstep felt like both pursuit and surrender. And as the door swung open, I realized that tonight the story was far from over, and the most haunting question was still waiting in the quiet for an answer. What do you do when the monsters hide behind your own badge? I exit the social services office with Madeline's small hand in mine. Her fingers curled around mine as though she fears I might vanish if I let go. The corridor's fluorescent lights blur into a steady hum, and the distant drone of the station's night shift seeps through the walls. Outside the door, I pause and let her look up at me. Her cheeks are hollowed by exhaustion, but her eyes, those pale, searching eyes, hold a quiet resolve. I realize that for her, this night has stretched into eternity, one corridor blending into the next, one face into another, until all she knows is the echo of footsteps and the unsteady pulse of fear. We step into the open air. The city stretches before us, muted by the lingering mist. Street lamps glow in halos, and the pavement gleams with residual rain. Despite the early hour, a few cars trundle by, drivers unaware of the horror that unfurled in vents beneath their feet. I keep us close to the curb, scanning the shadows as if expecting to see Dempsey stalking through the mist, or Archer's haunted silhouette chasing us into the fog. But the street is empty, silent except for the soft click of Madeleine's shoes against the concrete. I wrap my coat tighter around her and point toward a battered black sedan idling under a flickering lamp. Valerie Chen stands outside, coat collar turned up against the damp air, clipboard pressed to her chest. The door is open, engine ticking its own soft protest against the chill. I guide Madeleine forward. She squeezes my hand and then, with surprising self-possession, releases it and steps toward Valerie. I watch as the social worker kneels and embraces her, a practiced tenderness in that gesture that I envy and mistrust at once. Valerie glances up as I approach. "We'll take it from here," she says quietly, her voice carrying the weight of authority and compassion in equal measure. She lifts Madeleine into the car's back seat and buckles her in. The girl reaches out and touches my hand one last time, tracing a line across my palm. "Thank you," she whispers. No fear, no pleading, just the fragile strength of a child who knows she's been saved by someone who might still be broken. I nod once, then step back. The car door clicks shut, and I watch as Valerie eases Madeleine away. The taillights glow red in the mist and then disappear around the corner. In their place, the night returns, gray, cold, unyielding. I stand on the sidewalk, coat collar turned up, fists shoved into my pockets. The hollow ache in my chest intensifies, pressing against my ribs. I replay the night's events in my head. The initial call, the broken window, Archer's desperate nods, the labyrinthine ducts, the confrontation with Dempsey, the shot that almost tore the world apart. I think of the landlord's body, the knife marks, the eviction notice, the torn denim, the baby pink sweatshirt, the grooves in the vents, all the evidence that once pointed toward one story and then shifted to reveal another, darker truth beneath. A cool breeze rattles the leaves on a nearby tree and rustles the yellowing edge of a missing "no parking" sign. The city exhales. I fall into the driver's seat of my cruiser, the interior light flickering on to reveal the scars of other nights. Coffee rings on the console, a ticket stub for an old baseball game, a crumpled donut napkin. I buckle in and close my eyes, letting the engine tick over. Dawn hasn't broken, but I suspect it's creeping closer, ready to flood the streets with light and force these shadows to retreat. I reach into the glove compartment and pull out a leather journal. Its surface is worn, the pages inside scribbled with details I'd rather forget. I open to a blank page near the back and write the date, May 10th, 2025. Then the words, rescue, child abandoned, bondsman's betrayal, precinct's failings. Beneath that, I draw a rough sketch of a vent grate, with little footprints leading away. A single line. We weren't the first to hide her, and we might not be the last. As I close the journal, my radio crackles. Detective Harris, dispatch, are you okay? I strain to keep my voice steady. I'm fine, I reply, just filing my report. The tone is perfunctory, but each word tastes of ash. I turn onto the main road, tires whispering on damp asphalt. Streetlights pass in a blur. In the rearview mirror, I catch a glimpse of the precinct's sign, the entrance lit by a single bulb. That light seems to flicker, uncertain. I feel a knot in my gut. The station, these walls, the ducts beneath them. They hold more secrets than I have hours to uncover. The city wakes in the distance. Sirens, horns, footsteps. But here, in the early morning mist, it remains a fragile boundary between safety and chaos. I grip the wheel with white-knuckled resolve. There are files to amend, cameras to review, duty logs to question. There are whispers in the records room, hidden corridors in the maintenance office. There are colleagues with whispered excuses, threats in late-night phone calls, alliances made in half-light. I pull into a side street, quiet, lined with shuttered storefronts. I park beneath an oak tree, its branches drooping with dew. I'm alone now, more alone than I felt in the vents. I kill the engine and sit in the fading hum. I close my eyes and listen to the city's first breaths, a distant siren, a garbage truck's groan, the soft scuffle of a lone pedestrian's feet. Then, nothing. I exhale, low and slow, until I can't feel the tightness in my chest. I think of Madeline, her trembling before the vent, her single word labeling Dempsey as bad, her silent acceptance of my promise to protect her. I think of Archer kneeling beneath the harsh lights, tears carving lines down his cheeks. His guilt, his fear, his desperate attempt to save the only family he had left. And I realize the story doesn't end with her safe behind locked doors. It doesn't end with Dempsey's cuffs clicking, or with me back behind this wheel, chasing daylight. It doesn't end when I write the final line of my report, or when the precinct's heavy doors slide shut for another shift. Instead, it ends. Whenever the next call comes in, whenever a child's whisper echoes down a vent, whenever a flashlight beam catches a strand of hair. And I remember that some truths hide in the narrowest passages. It ends when I learn to trust the silence between questions, because that's where the real monsters wait. I start the engine, headlights cutting through the fog. I shift into drive. The streetlight above me flickers one last time and goes out. And I drive on into the dawn, chasing every question that has no answer. The city wakes in the distance. Sirens, horns, footsteps. But here, in the early morning mist, it remains a fragile boundary between safety and chaos. I grip the wheel with white-knuckled resolve. There are files to amend, cameras to review, duty logs to question. There are whispers in the records room, hidden corridors in the maintenance office. There are colleagues with whispered excuses, threats in late-night phone calls, alliances made in half-light. I pull into a side street, quiet, lined with shuttered storefronts. I park beneath an oak tree, its branches drooping with dew. I'm alone now, more alone than I felt in the vents. I kill the engine and sit in the fading hum. I close my eyes and listen to the city's first breaths. A distant siren, a garbage truck's groan, the soft scuffle of a lone pedestrian's feet. Then, nothing. I exhale, low and slow, until I can't feel the tightness in my chest. I think of Madeline, her trembling before the vent, her single word labeling Dempsey as bad, her silent acceptance of my promise to protect her. I think of Archer kneeling beneath the harsh lights, tears carving lines down his cheeks, his guilt, his fear, his desperate attempt to save the only family he had left. And I realize the story doesn't end with her safe behind locked doors. It doesn't end with Dempsey's cuffs clicking, or with me back behind this wheel, chasing daylight. It doesn't end when I write the final line of my report, or when the precinct's heavy doors slide shut for another shift. Instead, it ends whenever the next call comes in, whenever a child's whisper echoes down a vent, whenever a flashlight beam catches a strand of hair, and I remember that some truths hide in the narrowest passages. It ends when I learn to trust the silence between questions, because that's where the real monsters wait. I start the engine, headlights cutting through the fog. I shift into drive. The streetlight above me flickers one last time and goes out. And I drive on into the dawn, chasing every question that has no answer. I remember the first time I stepped into that room like it was yesterday, though it's been years. The fluorescent light overhead flickered once as I walked through the door, casting the peeling paint on the walls into harsh relief. I flicked on the tape recorder, its red light blinking steadily, and set it on the table next to a steaming styrofoam cup of coffee I'd forgotten to drink hours earlier. Outside, rain pounded against the window in staccato bursts, a relentless percussion that seemed determined to drive the world to silence. I sat down opposite him, the suspect, and for a moment we just stared at each other. The low hum of the overhead light filled the silence, and I could almost feel the seconds stretching between us, each one a heavy weight in the cramped space. He was older than I first assumed, maybe late 40s, graying at the temples, but with eyes that were ice cold, unblinking. His jaw was tense, as though he were chewing on every thought before letting it out in words. When I asked his name, he said, "Arthur Lamb," in a voice that rasped through dry lungs. He didn't look at me when he spoke. Instead, he stared at the corner of the ceiling, as if that chipped spot held the answers to his fate. I cleared my throat and leaned forward, trying to make my radio-quiet voice fill the room. "Arthur, we've got you on camera leaving the scene. We found the crowbar in your car, covered in his blood." I let it hang there. The cup clinked when I set it down too hard. He sighed once, a sound that seemed to echo off the walls. I didn't mean to. His eyes flicked to mine finally, and I saw something in them. Regret. Yes, but also a kind of confusion, like he wasn't sure what he'd done. I unfolded the file in front of me. The pages were damp on one edge where rain had dripped in through a window he'd broken during the break-in. The victim, an elderly man who lived alone, had called out, and Lamb said he panicked. That was the story. Simple, straightforward, as though life were meant to be so neat. "You panicked," I repeated, tapping the picture of the old man on the floor, eyes closed, lying face down in his own hallway blood. "And you hit him with the crowbar." He stared at the photograph, jaw working. "I didn't mean to kill him," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "He came at me." He paused, swallowing. "He swung the cane at me, insisted I was a burglar, and, I don't know, something snapped." He looked at his hands then, wrapped in plastic as evidence bags. I noticed the knuckles were bruised, still tender. "He fought back?" I pressed gently. He nodded once. All I heard was the crack, then the blood. The tape recorder captured the static hiss, the reins thrumming, the creak of the chair as he shifted. "I ran," he said. "I ran straight to my car, drove down to the station." He stopped again, and I realized he'd been holding his breath. Then I turned around. He looked at me like he expected me to nod approval. "I came back," he finished. "I wanted to fix it." The room grew cold. I leaned back and rubbed the back of my neck, feeling the tension not there. "If you wanted to fix it, why didn't you try to save him?" My voice was softer now. His eyes flicked down and he closed them. For a long moment there was nothing but rain and the hum of the fluorescent light. Then he exhaled, mouth curling into a sad half-smile. "Because I didn't know how." He shrugged, as though shrugging off the weight of a man's life. He was gone by the time I got to him, And I thought if I came back here, maybe you'd believe I hadn't meant it. I hit stop on the recorder, the red light fading. I closed the file and pushed it toward him. That's not a defense, Arthur. That's just fear talking. He stared at the folder for a long moment, face blank. Then he looked up and met my gaze straight on. What if that's all any of us have? The question hung in the air like smoke. I shifted in my seat, unable to find an answer that sounded true. Outside, the rain let out a shrill patter against the metal frame, as though things were caving in. When I finally stood and unfastened my holster, he leaned forward and whispered, "Don't pretend you wouldn't do the same." I left him there, cuffs clicking shut, tapes still spinning. 20 minutes later, I was back in my patrol car, rain streaking the windshield like tears. My partner Davis slid over in the passenger seat, eyes wide. "How'd it go?" he asked. I rubbed my eyes, exhaustion settling in. "He didn't deny it," I said flatly. But it wasn't a confession either. I took a deep breath, half hoping Davis would say something that made sense. Instead, he just handed me a fresh cup of coffee and stared out at the storm. "Sometimes," he said finally, voice low, "the truth doesn't fit into our laws." I nodded, too tired to argue. The wipers thrashed across the glass, but even then I could feel the silence pressing in behind me. And I couldn't shake the feeling that in that dimly lit room, something vital had slipped between us, something neither of us could ever claim back. I sat in the car for a long minute after that, the engine idling while the rain blurred the world beyond the windshield into smeared streaks of red and white. In the rearview mirror, I caught my own eyes, hollowed by midnight, dark circles, not entirely from exhaustion. I turned the key off and listened. The wipers slowed to a stop. The world outside was drowned in water and darkness, and inside it seemed even quieter than before. I shut the door and walked toward the station, each step echoing under the overhang, water dripping off my coat. Inside the lobby, the fluorescent lights glowed steady, too bright, sterile. I passed the front desk without a word, nodded at the desk sergeant, and headed down the hallway toward the break room. The ticking clock above the door seemed louder than usual, each second an accusation. I poured myself another cup of coffee, black this time, and carried it back to the interrogation wing. Davis followed at a half pace, frowning. "You okay?" he asked softly, once we were out of earshot of rolling tape recorders and filing cabinets. I stared at the steam swirling above my coffee, smelling its bitterness. "Yeah," I lied, because I didn't know what else to say. The truth was running like quicksilver in my chest, slippery and bright and impossible to pin down. Davis lifted an eyebrow and glanced at the interrogation rooms. Doors closed, little windows curtained. "You gonna run through your notes?" he asked. I nodded, and we walked together toward the evidence locker. The hall smelled of bleach and old paper. My boots squeaked on the linoleum floor. In the locker, I pulled the drinks and sandwiches I'd stashed away for the night, along with a pack of cigarettes I didn't smoke anymore. I thumbed the pack open reflexively, then closed it and shoved it back in my pocket. I needed something steadier than nicotine right now, something that didn't carry memories of my own mistakes. Back at my small office, I spread out the files, the crime scene photos, the KD printout of the call, copies of the witness statements. I'd read them all 3 times already, but I flipped through them again, hoping something would leap out, some contradiction I'd missed. But the paper was stubborn. It held nothing more than ordinary facts. Lamb's car plate, the time of death, that frantic 911 call. Nothing to explain the look in Lamb's eyes when he said, "Don't pretend you wouldn't do the same." I scribbled more notes. Regret? Genuine? Panic versus intent. Need to interview neighbors. My pen scratched, the only sound besides my breath and the soft hum of the heater. The rain had turned from a furious drumming to a steady drumbeat, like an old war march you couldn't outrun. Outside the window, the parking lot lights glowed in halos through the haze. Every so often, a car passed beneath them, spraying arcs of water. I leaned back, hands behind my head, and closed my eyes for a moment. The ceiling tiles were stained with water damage. One of them sagged a little, drooping like a wounded wing. I remembered another interrogation years ago, in a room just like this, when I'd sat across from a man convinced his dead wife was alive and watching him. He didn't say much either, just stared at the ceiling until tears ran down his face. I'd ended the tape early that night, too, because I didn't trust what I was hearing. Or maybe I didn't trust what I was feeling. A knock on the door pulled me back. Davis poked his head in, expression guarded. "The DA wants to see you," he said quietly. "She said it's urgent." My heart gave a tight twist. The district attorney didn't call cops on the night shift unless something went sideways. I nodded and grabbed my jacket. The hallway was deserted. When I reached her office, the lights were dim, the blinds drawn halfway down. She sat behind her desk, her silhouette outlined by a desk lamp, papers scattered like fallen leaves. The DA never looked tired, even now, but tonight her brow was furrowed, lips set in a thin line. "Officer," she said, voice gravelly. She handed me an unmarked envelope. My stomach clenched. I slid a finger under the flap and pulled out a single sheet. My name was scrawled at the top. Below it the words, "Previous Officer of Record." I frowned and read on. "Body found at scene of second break-in, 1998, unsolved." Below that, an address. I stammered, "But this was decades ago. The victim was a—" She raised a hand. We reopened the file. The circumstance matches. Same M.O., same alley entrance. You're the only one alive who worked that graveyard shift at Precinct 4 back then. My world swayed. The body from 1998. I'd been a rookie that night. I remembered the sting of adrenaline more than the face of the victim. I remembered hearing voices in the ambulance bay, whistling through the pipes. I remembered suppressing a chill that had nothing to do with the October wind. I thought I'd buried that memory. She leaned forward, gaze unblinking. "We need your recollection, your entire report." My throat tightened. I thought of Lamb's words in the heat of his confession, his eyes underwater with sorrow. I thought of that shaky surrender. And then I thought of the man from 98, whoever he was, lying in the alley with his life half stilled. Outside, the rain let up, leaving a sudden hush. I stepped back to the window and parted the blind. The station's neon sign flickered. I traced the droplets racing each other down the glass. My reflection stared back. An older man in uniform, ghosts lining his coat pockets. When I turned back to the DA, I forced my voice steady. "Show me what you've got." She nodded, pushing a second envelope across the desk. Inside, more photographs, yellowed with time. I held one up, a crumpled hat, a torn jacket sleeve, a man on the pavement, half his face gone. My hand trembled. I realized then that the thing about interrogations was not just extracting truths from others, but confronting the ones you've buried in yourself. The clock on the wall ticked twice as loud as before. In that moment, I knew this case wouldn't let me leave it alone, and Lamb's shadow, with his haunted apology, was stretching to collide with mine. I closed my eyes, waited for the next minute to pass. Then I opened them and picked up the photographs. Even now, when I hear the first notes of rain, it's his voice I hear asking, without anger. Don't pretend you wouldn't do the same. I slipped out of the DA's office and back into the hallway, the envelope of photographs burned into my palm like a brand. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt sodden, as though the weight of every drop was tethered to my bones. I walked past the interrogation rooms, doors closed, lights off, the little curtained windows reflecting my guilty face back at me, and headed instead for the locker where we kept evidence from cold cases. My boots clicked on the tile, marking time in a rhythm that made my heart pound. Inside the cold metal cabinet, I found the bundle marked 1998 Alley Death and added it to the stack I already carried. A knot tightened in my throat as the musty smell of old paper and rusted staples reached me. I remembered the night I bagged that body, how the alley smelled of wet asphalt and gasoline fumes, how I'd knelt beside him and felt the last tremor of his hand against mine before the coroner arrived. They told me then it was a heroin overdose. I wrote it up that way. I told myself it was nothing more than a routine cleanup. But now the DA was asking me to reopen it, to question every word I'd scrawled under the yellow glow of the overhead lamp. I made my way back to the interrogation wing and chose the room with the smallest table, the one where I'd first read Lamb his rights. I set the old photographs on the table beside the file from this week's case, the damp corners of Lamb's evidence bag brushing against the yellowed edges of the 1998 folder. Then I sat down, closed my eyes for a moment, and let the silence settle around me like a shroud. When I opened my eyes, I picked up the first photograph, a blurry image of an alleyway, tin cans strewn on the ground, a ragged trash bag splayed open like some wounded animal. The victim lay just beyond the frame. I traced the dark shape with my eyes, remembering the stillness of that night, how even the distant echo of the city had felt muted. I could still hear the soft whisper of my boots on the damp pavement as I approached. I wondered if I'd heard something then, some subtle cue that this death wasn't what it seemed. My phone buzzed, startling me. A text from Davis. "You still in there? We got a neighbor who wants to talk." I tapped back. "Bring him in." The interrogation room door clicked open, and Davis led in a man in his 60s, clutching a rolled-up umbrella. His face was lined with worry, and he kept looking at the evidence bags on the table like they were snakes ready to strike. I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat down, placing the umbrella handle between his knees. The brim of his fedora cast a shadow over his eyes. "Mr. Harlan," I began, my voice steady even though my stomach lurched. "Thank you for coming in. You said you saw someone that night?" He swallowed, leaning forward. "Not me, son. My cousin, Clara. She lived in that building by the alley. She heard something. Didn't come forward before because, well, you know how people are. Afraid." He glanced at me then, as though gauging whether I'd judge him for waiting 27 years to speak up. I nodded, tapping the photo again. "What did she tell you?" His eyes flicked past me, toward the curtained window where I could see the leftover droplets clinging to the glass. Clara's words came in a low rumble. She said she heard a voice. A man crying out. Not like crying for help, more like sobbing with shame. Said he was sorry, kept muttering, "I didn't know it would end this way." Then she heard the sound of someone dragging something heavy into the shadows. She thought maybe it was rats, but she said it didn't sound right. She said she saw a figure, tall, hunched, dragging what looked like a body bag. She got chills, went back inside, locked her door. Mr. Harlan paused, taking a breath. She was too scared to come forward, thought the cops would laugh her off. I felt a cold twist in my chest. She saw someone dragging a body into the alley where they found him? He nodded. "Pretty sure. His hand trembled as he reached for the edge of the table. I didn't believe her myself. Said she was imagining things after my cousin died. She got hit by a car 2 months later, so I didn't push her. He looked at me with tired eyes. But now maybe I should have. I leaned forward, heart hammering. This changes everything. My voice sounded brittle, as though the room itself might splinter. I picked up the file from the DA, notes of our new theory. Possible staged scene. Confession tape? DNA sample. I set it beside the old photos. We have a man under arrest right now, Arthur Lamb. His case bears similarities to what happened in '98. I tapped the new file. He claims panic. Similar MO, blunt instrument, drag, silence. Mr. Harlan's face went pale. I didn't know, he stammered. That was Panama Street, not Main Alley. His words tumbled faster now. Those streets are different. My Clara was talking about Main Alley, the one behind the grocery, not Panama. I realized I'd assumed the same location. I let out a breath. I'm sorry, mixed them up. He shook his head, but I felt a thread of relief and another of dread. Because if Lamb's crime scene wasn't the same, then what made me connect them? And what had I missed in both? I called Davis outside the room. Run the addresses again, Panama versus Maine. Also check records for any other similar calls in between. The door closed, leaving me alone with Mr. Harlan and a storm of my own making. He sat back, shoulders slumped, as though carrying the weight of his cousin's fear for decades. I watched him, wondering whether his memory was tainted by grief, and whether my memory of '98 was tainted by fatigue and routine. When Davis returned, he laid out the map on the table, marking the alley where the 1998 victim was found and the street where Lamb's crime took place. They were blocks apart, no overlap. I felt a pulse of guilt. I'd let my mind draw connections where they didn't exist. But then Davis pointed to a third marker. Another alley, halfway between both sites. A location I'd never even considered, where in 2005 a transient had died from blunt trauma, ruled accidental. 3 cases, 3 alleys, 1 unknown pattern. The paper trail was clean on each, no mention of confession, no whisper in any report. But in my gut I felt the same tremor. Someone had been dragging bodies, leaving men to die in silent shadows, and I'd walked past each scene without hearing the faint cry for justice. I closed my eyes, pressing my forehead against the cool surface of the map. The humming, fluorescent light seemed to pulse above me, and somewhere, maybe in the station's old pipes, I thought I heard the soft, ragged sobbing Mr. Harlan described. I wondered if Lamb's apology, the 1998 lapse, and that 2005 file were all adrift on the same current of panic and regret. Or if they were separate ghosts, each haunting me in its own way. The clock ticked twice, each beat echoing in my skull. I knew I couldn't solve it tonight, but I knew I had to keep digging, or I'd drown in the silence of what I'd let slip through my fingers. I gathered the files, shaking off the cold sweat on my hands, and stood. I needed fresh coffee, and maybe some air. I stepped into the hallway and closed the interrogation room door behind me, the click of the latch final, yet somehow unfinished. I stepped into the night air, and the station doors closed behind me with a hollow thud that reverberated through the empty parking lot. The damp chill of the evening wrapped around me, seeping through my coat and sliding down my spine. I flicked on my flashlight and squinted across the rows of parked patrol cars, their windshields slick with residual drops from the last storm. I'd left the files and the map behind in the interrogation room, but their weight hadn't settled. In fact, it seemed to press down harder now that I was out here alone. I walked toward the perimeter fence, boots crunching on gravel, and tried to sort through the sequence of events. 3 cases, 3 alleys, a pattern I might have imagined, or one that genuinely threaded through decades of silence. The first alley, Panama Street, held Arthur Lamb's broken life, a man undone by panic and regret. The second, Main Alley, had the nameless victim I'd misremembered, leaving Mr. Harlan to carry his cousin's fear for 27 years. And the third alley, in between both, had that 2005 case, a transient found with blunt trauma ruled accidental. None of them spoke in official reports of whispers or dragging bodies, but something in their overlap haunted me. I turned my flashlight beam toward the fence line and noticed the low hum of the station's emergency generator, punctuated by the steady tick of water dripping from the gutter above. I slid through the small access gate and followed a narrow service path that led behind the station. The air smelled of wet earth and oil, and somewhere in the darkness I heard the distant hum of a train passing. My mind drifted back to those interrogation rooms, the faces I'd seen in the dull glow of fluorescent lights. Lamb's haunted apology, the neighbor's late-coming testimony, the DA's terse demand for my recollection. Every voice still lingered, a whisper in the back of my head I couldn't silence. I shivered and pulled my collar tighter, telling myself I needed answers, that this was part of the job, that I was just following up on cold leads. Halfway down the service path, I saw the shape of the old alley I'd never considered. A narrow gap between the maintenance shed and the neighbor's fence. It was poorly lit, just a broken street lamp swinging in the wind. I hesitated at its entrance and trained my flashlight on the ground. Rusted cans, shattered glass, and a scattering of cardboard reminded me of my first patrol there years ago. I crouched and ran my fingers over the damp surface, looking for footprints, tire marks, anything. But the rain had washed it clean. I stood and swept my light toward the shed. The shadow it cast looked like someone leaning against the metal wall, but when I stepped closer, there was nothing but peeling paint and graffiti, a crude outline of a face with hollow eyes staring back at me. I exhaled slowly, feeling my chest tighten. The rundown alley had been a shortcut I took when the station got slow, a secret route most officers avoided because it felt off. Now, I wondered if I'd heard something there long ago. Footsteps where there shouldn't have been, distant voices carried on the wind. I remembered pausing once, flashlight in hand, convinced I heard someone whisper a name I didn't recognize. I chalked it up to fatigue or the wind rattling a tin can. But tonight it felt like an invitation. I took another step in, the gravel shifting underfoot, and heard the faintest scrape behind me. I spun, heart pounding, flashlight beam slicing through darkness. Nothing. I forced a laugh, more to steady myself than anything. "Get a grip," I muttered. But the scrape came again, closer, deliberate. I backed up to the alley entrance, scanning for movement, but saw only stale shadows. Then I heard breathing, slow, measured, and uncomfortably close. It wasn't Lamb's ragged confession or the sobbing neighbor. I recognized it as my own memory, echoing in the hush. My flashlight flickered, and for a heartbeat I saw a figure between the dim street lamp and the fence line. A man, hunched and still, face concealed. I blinked, and he was gone. I swallowed, the concrete wall pressing cold against my back. My radio crackled to life. Davis's voice, muffled. "You okay? We lost power on the back cameras." He sounded concerned, maybe even scared. "That alley's dark as a tomb. Come back." I exhaled and spoke into the radio, voice steady. "On my way." I turned and retraced my steps to the station, each echo of my boots sounding like hurried warnings in my ears. Inside, the lights were dim, power flickering in the hall. The station felt empty, hollow, as if everyone had vanished. I headed back to the interrogation wing, passing the locked rooms where I'd left decades of questions unanswered. The door to room 3, where I'd begun this night of reckoning, was ajar. Inside, the old map lay sprawled across the table, but the 2005 file was gone. In its place was a single photograph, a black and white image of a man lying face down in an alley, body obscured by a clenched fist. The corners were damp, and the caption, scrawled in familiar handwriting, read simply, "You were here." My heart slammed in my chest. I recognized that rush of panic. I'd felt it the night I cuffed Arthur Lamb, the night I read the 1998 report, the night I ignored Clara's warning. The photograph trembled in my hand, and I realized the confession I'd been seeking wasn't on tape or in witness statements. It had been written in the space between memory and denial, in the alleys I walked past without seeing, in the silences I chose to accept. I dropped the photo on the table and slumped into the chair, whole sides of me aching. My flashlight had died somewhere in the alley, leaving me in partial darkness, but the one lamp above the table glowed steady, as if waiting for me to finish. I reached out, touching the photograph gently, as though it might crumble. Outside the curtained window, I could hear the generator's hum restart, then fade into silence once more. I thought of Lamb's final words. "Don't pretend you wouldn't do the same." I thought of the man in '98, the neighbor's silent cousin, the transient in 2005. I thought of my own footsteps in dark alleys, my own questions left unasked. And I realized that the real pattern I'd been chasing wasn't a string of murders. It was my own complicity in turning away from truth. The clock in the hallway ticked twice, echoing through the walls. I sat there, alone with the photograph, with the weight of every unsaid word and every secret I'd chosen to forget. And I knew that tomorrow I would have to face it all, the files, the evidence, my own memories, and the question printed beneath that lone image. But tonight, in the hush, I only breathed, and the photograph remained, waiting. I stayed in that chair long after the photograph slipped from my fingers and slid to the table's edge, the single desk lamp casting the image's half-gloss surface into stark relief. The rain had finally given way to a humid stillness, but somewhere in the station's bowels, I could hear water trickling, the slow drip of a leak no one had bothered to fix. I let my mind unravel through the night's revelations, inching forward, backward, then going silent. My eyes traced the contours of the photograph. A body, face down in an alley, hand clenched as though a final plea. Underneath, those 3 words, "You were here." I stood and circled the table, fingertips brushing the damp corners of each folder as though they were gravestones. The Lamb file, the 1998 folder, the empty spot where the 2005 file should have been, and now the photograph. My breath came in shallow waits. I realized I had to retrace my steps, walk the path of each case, to see what I'd missed in my blind rush to closure. I slid the folders into my coat pocket and snuffed out the lamp, plunging the room into the fluorescent hum that felt more oppressive in darkness. The curtained window refused to reveal the empty hallway. Instead, it bore back the reflection of my tired form. I stepped out and found Davis waiting just outside, leaning against the opposite wall. His eyes went to the pocket bulge of my coat and back to my face. "What did you find?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "Something I need to see. I'm heading to Panama Street first." I dropped my voice. "Then Main Alley, then that 3rd one." He frowned. "At 2 in the morning?" I shrugged, too restless to care. "Better now than tomorrow, when my memory will have cobwebs in it." He studied me, hand drifting to his sidearm as though checking for a sixth sense of trouble. Then he nodded. "I'm coming." We walked out together into the lobby, the caution tape over the evidence lockers flapping like half-heard warnings. The building felt emptied, but the files in my pocket weighed more than any crowd. We slipped past the front desk, no greetings, no flash of radios, and exited into the night. The air was muggy, thick enough you could chew on it. The station lights outside cast pale pools on the asphalt. I led the way to my cruiser, unlocked it, and we climbed in. I started the engine quietly, the dash lit up like a judge's gavel. I handed Davis a battered map I'd scribbled all over earlier. "Follow me." We rolled out onto the street, tires splashing through shallow gutters. I kept the headlights dim, didn't want to spook anyone loitering around deserted alleys. The first stop was Panama Street, where Arthur Lamb had broken in and a man had died under the sway of panic and regret. I drove slowly, scanning each dark side street until the cracked pavement of Panama stretched before us. The building where the crime occurred was long since boarded up. Graffiti ran across its windows like wounds. We parked half a block away and got out, the night air thick with the scent of damp concrete. I crossed the street and stepped beneath the broken street lamp. Its bulb flickered uncertainly, casting uneven pools of light that churned with every gust of breeze. The door to the old building was padlocked. I tugged at the chain. Rust gave way with a shriek, and the door swung inward, moaning as if protesting decades of abandonment. I flicked on my flashlight and shone it inside. The floor was littered with shards of glass, a few rusted tools, and, off to the side, a dusty wooden crate. I crouched and ran my gloved fingers along the top. It felt freshly disturbed. Grooves in the dust suggested something heavy had been dragged across. "Lamb's crowbar?" Davis whispered behind me. I nodded, lifting the crate's lid. Inside lay a rusted crowbar, one end smeared with old brown stains. I shone the light on the floor beneath it, a smear of dark, crusted residue that hadn't been there before. I snapped a picture with my phone, proof for the DA, and stood, the narrow shaft of light trembling. Lamb had returned here, or someone had. Even the neighbor's confession about Main Alley was haunted by this. A chill rolled down my back. "He came back," I murmured. Davis snapped his flashlight toward a row of footprints. Well, faint indentations where someone dragging a heavy object had left marks in stale dust. The tracks led out into a back corridor. I followed, heart pounding. The corridor opened to a fire escape stairwell. Rainwater hadn't reached here in years, yet the metal stairs gleamed with fresh moisture. I looked down, slick steps leading into a concrete bit of land where the alley reopened beside an overgrown lot. I swallowed, hearing a whisper of wind that sounded like a voice saying, "Sorry." We climbed down and stepped into the back alley. This was Panama, all right. Metal dumpsters, brick walls tagged with initials, the distant rumble of midnight traffic. My flashlight swept over the ground. We saw a ragged length of rope, half buried in trash. It lingered like a noose. I nudged it with the toe of my boot. It stuck for a moment, as though caught on something unseen. I bent and pulled it free. There was a faint smear of damp soiling on one end, fresh despite the building's age. I bagged it. My gut nodded. Whoever had been here, Lamb or someone else, had retread those steps after the murder, dragging something heavy all the way down. I turned and opened my flashlight's lens wide to see the alley behind me. The brick wall curved, meeting the lot where Main Alley began. Davis came up beside me, his breath visible in the flashlight's beam. "You sure this is Panama?" he asked. I nodded curtly. "Yeah, but it leads straight into Maine." I pointed to a chained gate hanging open. We crossed into Main Alley the way a single step could blur time and place. Main Alley had been the site of that 1998 death. I squinted into the gloom, recalling the photograph of the dead homeless man, words pasted beneath his image. "You were here." I'd written that under my rookie hand, ignorant of patterns. Now, the alley looked smaller, almost suffocating, brick walls leaning inward. The stench of rotted garbage and wet leaves filled the air. My flashlight flicked over a wall memorial, a crude painting of a hat and tattered coat. Someone had left fresh flowers in a smashed bottle. Davis and I exchanged looks. "What's this?" he murmured. I swallowed, voice rough. "Clara's tribute." I knelt and placed my palm on the wet petals. She never got justice. I pressed a handkerchief into my coat pocket. Clara's cousin's name scrawled on a note pinned to the bottle. We followed the alley toward its exit, stepping over broken glass and cardboard. Near the far end, I spotted fresh footmarks in the mud. Barely a footprint, but enough to tell someone had come through. I knelt and traced it with my finger. It led toward the train tracks that ran beyond the station yard, the same route the transient from 2005 would have crossed. I felt the tug of a line through time, Panama to Maine to the mid-block alley where the third man died. But this time, the footprints were clear. Someone had walked them recently, carrying something heavy. A drag mark paralleled the tracks, turning toward a utilities hatch half buried under weeds. I laid out my flashlight on the ground, handheld, pointing at the hatch. Davis crouched beside me, prying the lid open with the crowbar we'd bagged. The hatch scraped and shifted, opening onto a narrow concrete trench. The smell hit first, damp earth and decay. I shone my light down and saw the edge of a canvas tarp folded back. I swallowed and climbed down, boots slipping in the muck. Davis close behind. Under the tarp lay a skeleton wrapped in tarp paper. A skull half exposed, teeth gleaming in the beam. My stomach heaved. Beneath the head, tied in duct tape, was an aged photograph. A man in a shabby coat, eyes lifeless. I recognized the face instantly, the transient who died in 2005, the one I ruled an overdose. He'd been murdered, not overdosed. The drag marks, the cries, the unseen confession. And someone had stashed his body here, where few would look. I stared at the bones, sweat and fear mingling in my veins. The drip of water above sounded like a heartbeat. Davis looked at me, eyes drenched in horror. "Son of a..." he started. But I pressed a hand to his shoulder. "We bring him out." I snapped photos, called it in. My voice echoed in the tunnel. I could hear my own breath rasping, heavy with guilt and revelation. The bodies, the confessions unspoken, the slow pattern. 3 men struck down, left in forgotten corridors, their pleas buried beneath layers of neglect. I closed the tarp and climbed out, breathing the chill night air. The station yard lights seemed distant, as though I'd surfaced from a grave. I looked at Davis. "They're all connected," I said, my voice shaking. 3 alleys, 3 deaths, and one person moving them between. He nodded, still pale. "We need backup, crime scene, forensics." I turned toward the street where my cruiser waited, heart thundering. My mind raced with possibilities. Lamb's panic wasn't the first, and maybe not the last. The DA's order to reopen 98 had unlocked a chain I'd held in place with lies and forgetfulness. As we walked back up the metal stairs, I realized that the real interrogation was only beginning. Not of suspects, but of my own decisions. I'd sat behind that table, willing to accept panic, remorse, and cheap closure. Now, I dug up bodies, patterns, and confessions never spoken. And standing beneath the station lights, the weight of every unasked question pressed on me. I lifted my face to the sky, letting the night air wash over my features. Inside, the station doors swung shut behind us. We carried the evidence bags like wounded survivors. The humming fluorescent lights welcomed us back with a mechanical greeting. I set the skeleton's bones and the crowbar, the ropes, the fresh flowers, and the map on the evidence locker. Each item slipped into its designated shelf, but their stories refused to stay contained. I looked at the clock above the door. 4:17 a.m. The horizon was pale with approaching dawn, but the shadows clung to the corners of the room. I turned to Davis. "We start interrogations at first light," I said. "And we bring every file, every witness, every neighbor back in." He grabbed his notepad. "I'll call the DA." I nodded. Alone, I walked back to the interrogation room where it began. The door was closed, but I held the handle for a moment, feeling its cold metal under my palm. I let go and turned to face the empty space beyond the curtained window. The photograph from earlier lay on the table, now one of many. And I realized with a quiet dread that the pattern had eyes, watching me. The bodies, the alleys, the broken files, they were calling out for justice through years of silence. And I was the one who had to answer. I sat down once more, heart hammering, and flicked on the recorder. Its red light blinked steadily. I pressed record and took a breath. "This is Officer James Monroe, badge 1274. Time, 04:19. Location, Precinct 4, Interrogation Room 3. Subject, pattern of unsolved deaths in Panama, Maine, and Camino alleys." My voice cracked, the edges raw with exhaustion and resolve. I swallowed and continued. Outside, the world edged into morning. Inside, the echoes of unspoken confessions waited for me, and I leaned in, ready to confront them all, one by one, until every question had an answer, or until the silence swallowed me whole. I woke to the buzz of my phone on the desk, not a ring, just a single vibration that felt like an alarm bell in my skull. Dawn had broken, though you wouldn't know it by the dull gray light seeping through the blinds. Davis was already here, leaning against the evidence locker, phone to his ear. He hung up and looked at me. "DA's office wants to see everything by noon. They're sending a team to review the scene photos and the remains. Forensics will be here in an hour." He flipped open his notebook, eyes bright with that nervous energy officers get when a case finally breaks. "We ready?" I rubbed my face, tasting stale coffee and regret. "We've got everything," I said, though my voice felt hollow. The interrogation room door was closed. Inside, the recorder still blinked red, waiting for me to finish the log. I stepped over to it and hit stop. The tape clicked. I unspooled a few inches of magnetic ribbon between my fingers, recalling every word I'd spoken. The confessions, the pattern, my own admission that I'd ruled a homicide and overdose years ago. I swallowed. Let's bring them in. The first was Mr. Harlan's cousin, Clara. No, her niece, the one who'd listened to the sobbing voice that night in 1998. She looked tired but resolute, sitting straight-backed in the plastic chair. I sat across from her, the lamp between us glowing soft and yellow. I opened her statement. "You heard a man crying, saw him drag something." She nodded, dark circles under her eyes. She described again, in hushed tones, the shape she saw, the voice she heard, even the smell of wet tobacco on his breath. I watched her hands. They trembled as she folded the yellowed paper. "I never came forward," she said. "I was scared. They said I was crazy." I leaned forward and lowered my voice. "We believe you now." Her relief was a silent exhale that filled the room, but it left me gasping for air. Next was the witness from 2005, a care aide who'd briefly cared for the transient before his death. She recognized the battered coat from the photograph I'd shown her. "He wore that the day I saw him," she said, voice trembling. She handed me a torn scrap of fabric she'd kept, a jagged piece of the same material wrapped around his wrist. I bagged it. The fabric's fibers were coarse, almost burlap-like, as though meant to conceal something raw. She shivered as she spoke of the man's final words. "Tell them I didn't push him," she whispered. I felt the weight of those words like a stone in my chest. By mid-morning, the DA herself paced the hallway, a stack of photos in hand. She gathered us in her office, me, Davis, the forensic lead, and the two witnesses. Sunlight broke through her blinds then, cutting the dimness into sharp lines. On her desk lay the files side by side. Lamb's confession, the 1998 report, the bones from the hatch, Clara's testimony, the care aide scrap. She tapped a photograph, the skull, half exposed. "This body was never reported missing," she said. "No family, no ID. We assumed overdose." She turned to me. "Officer Monroe, your initial ruling decided this case went cold. Why?" My throat tightened. I met her gaze. "I saw no signs of foul play at the time. No bruising, no forced entry. The coroner marked it as accidental." I paused. I trusted the report. The DA's eyes narrowed. "And you've learned otherwise." She flipped through more photos, footprints, rope fibers, drag marks, and looked at Davis. "Your team is following up leads on the crowbar, the rope, and the addresses. But there's a human pattern here, a person behind it all." She folded her hands. "Who do you suppose it is? A vagrant like Mr. Harlan's uncle said he saw? Or someone with access to these scenes over decades?" Silence settled like concrete. I pictured the alleys, the dumpster, the maintenance shed, the utilities hatch. All my patrols, all my late-night rounds, the hours I'd spent staring at evidence bags under fluorescent lights. And then I saw him, me, my own boots in those alley footprints. Surely I'd walked through Panama Street at least twice, through Main Alley, through the third site. I felt the edges of my mind tremble. The DA asked again, "Who?" I swallowed hard, voice barely above a whisper. I don't know." But I did. I recognized the pattern of my own routine, the path I took to get from my car to the station headquarters, the shortcuts I used. And in each place, evidence of bodies left in shadows, voices never heard. No one to testify save my own tired eyes. The DA opened her mouth, then closed it. The forensic lead stepped forward. "Sir, you requested we check your cruiser logs." He handed me a printout. GPS pings, timestamps, coordinates. They matched every alley. My cruiser had parked outside Panama Street 3 times in 1998. It ran along Main Alley on the night Clara heard the voice in June 1998. It returned again in 2005, around the time the transient died. And last night it tracked into the service path behind the station, the same path I walked with Lamb's crowbar in hand. The DA let that sink in. "Care to explain?" My head pounded so hard the room tilted. I don't remember," I said, voice cracking. "It was routine, checking shifts, responses." My hand trembled as it brushed the edge of the desk. Clara and the care aide stared at me, eyes wide, crestfallen. Davis put a hand on my shoulder. "James," he began, but I silenced him with a shake. I sank to a knee, hands pressed to the cool wood. The DA lowered herself to eye level. "This pattern doesn't happen without someone. Someone who knew exactly where to leave each body so no one would look. Someone who had authority, access, training." She paused, voice soft but steady. "You." My breath locked in my throat. The room spun, the thoughts I'd buried, passing corners too quickly. deferring follow-ups, ignoring whispers, rushed back like floodwaters. I'd been the one, without malice or intent, who decided these deaths were accidents, overdoses, stray break-ins. My reports had sealed away evidence and voices. My memory had protected me, until it couldn't anymore. Outside the DA's window, a car alarm went off. I heard the squeal and then silence. I looked up at her. "They're not linked by wires or rope," I rasped. "They're linked by me." I held her gaze. "I'm the only constant in every case." The DA exhaled. "This isn't about blame. It's about truth." She gestured to Davis. "We'll conduct full audits. Outside investigators. You'll be on leave until this is cleared." She paused. "It's time to face every question you ignored, every case you wrote off." I closed my eyes, the dam of my curiosity and guilt finally broken. "I will," I said. "I need to." Davis helped me to my feet. Clara and the care aide rose, eyes glossy. I looked at them, at their faces that once told stories I'd lumped together and filed away. I saw the toll my silence had taken. The corridors outside the office felt colder, lined with empty desks and silent phones. I realized how quiet the station must seem to every neighbor who heard whispers in their halls, to every victim whose cry went unrecorded, to every body left in alleys I'd passed. The DA stood, brushing papers into a neat stack. "We'll need full statements now, and every report you filed on these streets." She met my eyes. "Thank you for coming forward." I nodded, voice taut. "I'm sorry I didn't see." She turned, letting her words hang in the air. "What matters is that you do now." I walked out of her office alone, each footstep a confession. The lobby lights flickered overhead, a stuttering echo of the fluorescent hum in interrogation rooms. I passed the front desk, untouched radios humming. Outside, morning traffic rumbled back to life. I stepped onto the sidewalk, feeling the sun's first heat on my back, and looked back at the precinct building. Windows dark, doors closed. Inside were secrets I'd kept, cases I'd ignored, lives I'd mislabeled. I straightened my shoulders and raised my chin. There would be interviews, evidence reviews, layers of oversight. I would speak every word I'd ever written, every shadow I'd ever passed. And maybe, finally, those 3 alleys would stop echoing with silence. Maybe the bodies would rest in truth, instead of dust and denial. I walked away from the station, but I carried it inside me. Every drop of rain, every flickering light, every heartbeat in the gloom. And as I rounded the corner, I brushed my hand against the pocket where I'd kept that final photograph. It was gone. In its place was a note. "Thank you for finally listening." I stopped at the curb and folded the note. A breeze kicked up, scattering a few torn leaves across the pavement. My eyes narrowed as I read the words again. Then I looked up at the station behind me and understood that confessions don't end when you speak them. They start something no one can ever finish. And I realized I'd spent my career asking questions of everyone but myself. I flipped on the overhead light and the room exhaled a dull buzz. Rain hissed against the single window behind me, rhythm hammering on metal. I'd been behind this table more times than I could count. My bones still felt every second of every one. Tonight, I was here for an unnamed woman found wandering the highway bleary-eyed, clutching a torn coat and whispering to herself. No dispatch details came close to the images in front of me. Her hollow eyes, fingers twitching like broken circuits, lips moving over words I couldn't quite catch. She sat on the metal chair opposite, shoulders hunched as if the air were too cold to stand upright. A flashlight beam from the hallway cut across her face, then retreated. The suspect's file sat open beside my coffee mug, now half cold. I'd read her intake twice. Found near mile marker 42, no ID, no name, no coherent memory. The guard cuffed her to the table, eyes darting away as her wrists rattled. I cleared my throat, leaned in, and said, "Can you tell me your name?" Silence. The metals of her cuffs seemed to grow heavier in that moment. She traced the grain of the table with a nail so long it clicked against steel. I reached across and touched the tip of that finger. She jerked back, startled, like she'd forgotten where she was. "There's no video feed in here," I said softly. "Tell me who you are." Her head snapped toward me. In the fluorescent glare, I caught the tremor of panic in her pupils. "You won't believe me," she whispered. The words came out clipped, breathy. "I've seen things." The clock on the wall ticked during the pause, an ungodly reminder that time was still moving for everyone else. I closed my eyes and tried to place her accent, familiar but distant. "Start with where you came from," I pressed. She inhaled hard. When she spoke again, it was as though she'd swallowed razor wire. "I came from a place that doesn't exist." She watched the drop of water slip down the window pane, then snapped her gaze back to me. "A place you can't follow." I blinked. Instinct screamed to change tactics, lean back, watch her. Instead, I stayed still. "What do you mean?" My voice wavered. I cursed myself for it. A good interrogator never showed surprise. She blinked once, twice, then she whispered, "The road. It fractures." Her words trembled with raw fear. "And they cross into our world." My heart banged in my chest. I leaned forward, jarred. "Who crosses?" I demanded. Her expression flickered. Childhood memory. Maybe guilt, maybe shame. She did. I asked a dozen follow-ups without getting a name, a place, a time. Only fragments. Someone clothed in shadow. Someone shape-shifting between the trees. Someone who needed blood for reasons she couldn't explain. When I asked why she followed, she traced the rain-soaked concrete outside the window. "She looks for someone to tell her it's over," the woman said, voice cracking. "But no one ever does." Then she stopped, eyes fixed on a distant point behind me. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I swiveled in my chair. The door was closed. My breath hitched. I turned back, and she was gone. The cuffs still looped to the table, but the chair sat empty. I jumped up. The room looked unchanged, except that my coffee was colder, the file folder upside down. I spun, hand on holster. Corridor lights shimmered. No guard, no footsteps. I rushed back inside, no suspect. My radio crackled to life. "Unit 4, suspect, moved to holding." A guard's voice. When I arrived at the lockup, she was in the cell, crouched in the corner, muttering to herself. Her wrists were raw where the cuffs had been. I scanned her face under the harsh cell light and found the same hollow fear. I took a deep breath, leaned close to the glass. "You left the room," I said, voice low. She looked up without blinking. "Only for a moment," she whispered. "To see if I was dreaming." I spent the next hour pressing her for the truth. How she vanished from the interrogation room, where she went, what she saw. She only shook her head, eyes glistening with tears no one heard fall. "You'll forget this," she said, voice so soft I nearly missed it. "But I won't." The guard behind me shifted. I stood, legs stiff, the rain still pounding. Outside, the world didn't stop. Inside, everything had changed. I left the cell feeling hollow, an emptiness that followed me down the hall. My partner intercepted me at the stairwell. "She saw," he said. I shook my head. "I don't know," I said, but I knew. I felt it in my gut. Something crossed through that little room. something human and not, something I'll never write in a report. And as we climbed the stairs, I wondered if I'd ever sleep again, knowing that silence can carry more terror than any scream. Rain spattered harder against the pane, drumming a relentless cadence that seemed to seep through the walls. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders, though I was already inside the precinct. The fluorescent buzz overhead felt closer now, like it was breathing down my neck. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, distant, unsteady, as if someone else was trying to find their way through the maze of desks and lockers. I paused, listening, but the sound slipped away before I could place it. My office door creaked as I pushed it open, and the stale smell of cold coffee and paper hit me. I set my keys down, the jangle too loud, and shut the door behind me. The interrogation room lay beyond, the one where she'd vanished for a moment. It was on my mind like a stain. I reached for the file on my desk. The cover was glossy, the edges bent from being opened and closed too many times. No name, no ID. Just Jane Doe in black marker. I flipped it open, scanning the intake form again. Found unconscious near mile marker 42 on County Road, C, blue jeans, black hoodie, no shoes, no wallet, no phone. Witness descriptions varied. Some said she walked barefoot along the shoulder, arms hugging herself like she was cold or afraid. Others claimed she talked to the trees. One sheriff's deputy reported a quiet whisper. "It follows." That note was in curly handwriting, like whoever wrote it almost hesitated. I drifted into memory, my first year on the street, watching a suspect claim the moon was alive and bleeding through the clouds. I'd thought it was the ramblings of a junkie high on meth, but this woman, she had none of the tremors, none of the needle marks. Her calm was what unnerved me, the unknown. The rain's rhythm shifted, gentler, then back to a hammer. Something in that beat felt like a countdown. I rose and moved to the doorway. The hallway was empty. No guard, no partner, no janitor pushing a mop. Only the distant hum of the evidence room refrigerator. I peered through the small window into the interrogation room. The table stood bare. 2 chairs tucked in. No footprints on the floor. Just the lingering sense that someone had been watching. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me. I stared at the table like it had burned me. I reached for the chair on the suspect's side, tracing its metal edge with my thumb. No cold spots, no smear of blood or sweat, just the dull sting of fluorescent light. I pulled the chair out and sat, leaning forward. My reflection in the window, older now, lines carved deeper around my eyes. That's the part of this job no one prepares you for. Your face ages faster than the rest of you. I let silence stretch. It filled the corners of the room, pressing against the walls. I imagined her there, curled in the chair, trembling or staring, or maybe staring at me, waiting. The minutes ticked by. Click, click, click. I stared at the clock, willing it to speak. Instead, it just marked time lost. I closed my eyes, saw her face again, the hollow shells that passed for eyes, the way her lips moved without sound, and the final moment, her sudden jump toward me, then the empty chair. That flash of movement still knocked the breath out of me. I opened my eyes and reached for the recorder on the table. I ran my finger over the red light button. Once I pressed it, there'd be no turning back. I clicked it on. A soft glow. "This is Officer Ward, Interrogation Room A3, date and time," I said automatically. Habit, always start with protocol. I paused the recording, switched the device off, knew I'd never let this session be part of the official record. I closed my eyes again, listening to the room, the hum, the drip of a leaky vent, the soft groan of the building settling in its foundation. I I pictured her in that chair, whispered words into the tape, things that didn't belong on any file. You left. I saw you move. It's not over. I slid out of the chair, stepping toward the door. My holster slapped against my thigh when I drew my weapon. Not because I expected her to walk through the door, more like I needed to feel something solid in my grip. I clicked off the recorder again, slipped it into my coat pocket. Back in the corridor, I jogged toward the holding area. Rain pattered on my shoulders as I passed the squad room. The radio crackled. "All units, be advised. We have a 1066 in progress. Suspect in transit. ETA 5 minutes. My partner's voice. He had her now. Restraint team on either side, carrying her like a wounded animal. I intercepted them outside the cell block. She was face down against the wall, her legs kicked, hoodie slipping, dirty hair hiding her face. I knelt beside her. "Jane Doe," I said. "It's me." Her head snapped up, eyes locked on mine, like I had keys to a prison she'd never reference. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She blinked tears into the fluorescent light. "I can't stay," she whispered. "They'll..." Her voice trailed. The guard lifted her arms, secured fresh cuffs. I saw the rawness at her wrists from the last set. Still bleeding. "Stay," I repeated. Beneath the armor of my vest, my chest tightened. A pocket of panic squeezed my lungs. This was the first time I felt something real, not anger, not adrenaline, but a raw fear that I might set something off by leaving her alone. She watched me step back. "It's almost morning," she said, voice fainter. "The fractures close." I frowned. "Fractures?" She shrugged, eyes distant. "Between worlds." She exhaled a breath. "She's stuck here now." I swallowed, voice low. "Who's stuck?" She looked away, toward the back corridor where the holding cells lined up like tombstones. "I am." I rose, looked at the guards. "Take her to medical," I ordered. "She needs stitches." They moved her down the hall. I watched until they turned the corner. Then I ran my hand through my hair, catching on a knot. The rain outside had slowed to a drizzle, daylight ghosting through the windows. I stared at the cell door now closed behind her, a flicker of doubt in my mind. Did she vanish again? Or had she just walked away? My radio crackled again. "Officer Ward, report to the evidence room." I left the corridor without looking back. But I felt her eyes on me, the weight of her stare like a promise. And as I pushed open the door to the evidence locker, everything I had believed about reality tilted on its axis. The files on the shelves, cases stacked in neat rows, blurred at the edges. I clenched my jaw, reminding myself of protocol, of procedure. Yet, even as I listed the items, coat, hoodie, unidentified bloody fragments, I knew none of it documented what I really needed to record. The moments she seemed not quite human, the silence that followed her words, and the soft cackle she offered when she thought no one was listening. I bagged the evidence with trembling hands, labeling each with a number that would go into the system. But each tag felt worthless against the enormity of her silence. Because some things can't be captured in a chain of custody. Some things live only in the unfathomable space between confessions and questions. I stepped out of the evidence room, rain returning full force, drumming on the roof. The precinct felt smaller now, like walls were pressing inward. I pulled my coat tighter again and headed back to my office, flipping the light on. The file still sat where I'd left it. I opened it to a blank page at the end, unscripted. My pen hovered. I knew I shouldn't write the truth here. No official space for whispers. But as the rain pounded, the hum persisted, and the fractures whispered across every corridor, I started to write anyway. Section, "Not for report. Moments when the world shifted." and I kept writing, even as the shadows lengthened and the storm raged on outside, certain that once I put it down, I could no longer deny what I'd seen, what I'd felt brush past me in that small room. The pen trembled in my hand, just like her finger clicking against the table, and the rain tapped a final beat against the window, a silent drum heralding the fracture I could never unsee. I stepped off the elevator into the basement hallway, where the single bare bulb flickered like a dying heartbeat. The evidence room door loomed ahead, its paint chipped and yellowed, the lock clicking softly as I slid my badge across the slot. Inside, the air was sticky with dust, and the faint tang of chemicals from the cleaning supplies locked away. I set the duffel bag, her possessions, onto the metal table and unzipped it. Her torn coat lay on top, damp and stiff from last night's rain. I lifted it, worn at the seams, and let the water drip onto the concrete floor. I studied the inside pocket. No wallet, no photo, no ID, only a scrap of folded paper. I unfolded it. A child's drawing of a house under a sun with drooping rays, all rendered in thick red crayon. Nothing about it made sense until I noticed the single word scrawled beneath the picture. Waiting. My heart skipped. How did that get in her coat? I slipped the paper into an evidence bag and taped it shut. Next, I emptied the hoodie. Layers of ripped tissues, a utility knife with traces of dried blood, and a single porcelain doll's head no bigger than my fist, its eyes painted bright blue. I held it up to the light, turning it in my palm. The hair had been cut away, caked in grime. The expression was twisted into a still smile, like it had witnessed something too terrible to forget. I wrapped it carefully and shelved it. As I labeled each item, the radio crackled. Evidence secured. All units clear. No mention of medical, no mention of what I'd seen. I choked back the frustration. This case was going dark, and they'd wipe it from the roster by morning. That's how the job worked. If you couldn't tie a name to a body, you moved on and let the shadows swallow the rest. I left the basement with my coat collar turned up, rain blasting my face as I stepped outside. The station's lights bled into the night, halos in the storm. I walked toward my car in the parking lot, passing rows of squad cars glistening wet. My partner's Crown Vic sat 2 spaces down. The engine idled, windshield wipers inching back and forth. He rolled down the window. "You still here?" he asked. His voice had that rasp, too much coffee, too few hours of sleep. I shook my head. Was tying up loose ends. He eyed the duffel in my hand. "She okay?" I paused. "I don't know," I said. "But she'll be fine. They've got her under observation." I lied. I knew asylum protocols. Once they decided insanity, she'd be locked away until she wasn't a risk. That could be years. I slid into the passenger seat. He turned off the engine. "Why did you find her body parts?" he asked quietly, nodding toward the evidence locker building. I thought she was wandering. No fractures, no missing limbs. A choke of laughter rose in my throat. "Number not body parts?" I said. "Body pieces, bits of memory." I watched his brow crease. That doll's head, it wasn't hers. It belonged to a girl who went missing decades ago. He frowned. "You're not," I held up a hand. "Look at the file. 30 years ago, 8-year-old Emily Harris disappeared from her front yard during a backyard sleepover. No witnesses, no leads, the case went cold." I swallowed. That doll's head was hers. They never found it. He went silent. The windshield glowed with streetlights passing overhead. I said, "She carries our lost children." His eyes met mine. "She follows them home." He shook his head. "This is too much." I closed my eyes, remembering the woman in Green's voice. "It follows." I pressed my fingertips to my temple. This isn't about evidence, it's a doorway. He glanced away, uncertainty in his stance. You think it's supernatural? I swallowed the bitterness. I don't know what it is. I stared at the rain-slicked window. All I know is, it's real. He started the engine. Let's get out of this storm. I nodded, but before the car pulled away, I looked back at the station. Through the lens of rain and neon, the windows looked like vacant eyes. It felt as though someone stood behind the glass, watching. I tapped the door lock and whispered, "Don't let her out." As we drove into the storm, the radio blinked on with static and then another dispatch. Be advised, 1066 suspect reported missing from holding cell. No sign of forced exit. My blood ran cold. I glanced at my partner, his jaw clenched. The rain pounded like a drum of doom. Somewhere behind us, inside that locked station, a woman vanished again, leaving only empty cells and unanswered questions in her wake. And I realized, as the world blurred past the windshield, that there was no pushing this into the shadows. This fracture between worlds had opened, and it wasn't going to close. I hear them now, the soft shuffle of feet in the hallway, the lock clicking on an empty cell. I can't tell if it's real or just the rain playing tricks on these walls. I step back into the interrogation room, the one with the cracked window and the chair that still bears the imprint of her shape. The badge on my chest feels heavier than steel. I'm alone in the hum, and every breath tastes of ozone and old coffee. I sit at the table again, this time without pulling out a file. Instead, I rest my palms on the cold metal surface and let my fingers fall into the grooves. My mind churns through every detail, the whisper, "It follows." The child's drawing labeled "Waiting," the porcelain head with painted eyes that could stare into your soul. I press my forehead into my hands, feeling the pulse pound under my skin. Something in me wants to scream at the ceiling, "Tell me what you want." But the room remains still, as if mocking me. I stand abruptly, sending my chair crashing back, tiny sparks of metal on concrete. Rain drips through the broken seal of the window, pooling on the sill in a tremor of droplets. I step forward and run my hand along the glass, tracing the path of water as though it were a confession. Outside, the sky opens wider. When I press my ear to the pane, I swear I hear a voice just beneath the thunder, soft and urgent. "Run." My heart hammers. I whirl back to the table, where the recorder from last night sits dark and silent. I flip it open, thumb hovering over the play button. Part of me thinks I shouldn't. These tapes aren't supposed to exist. But I need to hear her voice again, need to remember exactly how she sounded between words. I click play, static for a moment, then a breath. Then her whisper, "They cross at fractures, places you don't see until it's too late." The tape stutters. I press pause and lean forward. That phrase, fractures. Each time she used it, it came with a shiver in her tone, like stepping onto thin ice. I rewind, press play again. They cross, more static, then blood ties them. My blood runs cold. I slam the tape shut and shove it into my coat pocket. Blood ties them. She never explained, not clearly. How does blood tie someone across worlds? What blood? Whose? I pace, boots scraping the floor. I need answers, and no one in this station will give them to me. Not the chief, who believes I'm chasing phantoms. Not the doctors at the asylum, who've labeled her delusional. And not the paperwork, which simply says Jane Doe, status held. I grab the duffel bag from the corner, the one I stowed in my office. I unzip it and tug out the items again. The torn coat, the doll's head, that crumpled drawing. I spread them across the table. The drawing's red rays look like veins against the bright sun. The doll's head stares blindly. The coat's pockets hold only emptiness. I press my palm to the table and close my eyes. I see her there, in the chair, eyes empty, voice low. Waiting. I open my eyes. The items blur. I push them aside. My gaze lands on the wall clock, its second hand stuck between ticks. Time suspended. The kind of time you only find in nightmares. I rise and pace to the locker where I keep my service weapon. I run a finger down the holster's grip, draw it free. I hold it at eye level, inspecting the barrel. I know why I'm doing this. To remind myself I still live in the real world. But I don't put it to my head. Instead, I slip it into my coat and head for the door. I'm going out into the storm. If she's loose in this precinct, if the fractures are widening, I need to confront it, head on. I step into the corridor. The lights flicker. My partner's radio crackles. Ward to dispatch. Do we have any update on the subject's condition? I take a breath. Negative? I respond. But I'm going to see for myself. Footsteps echo behind me. I turn. Nobody there. I step forward. Somewhere in the drumming rain, I hear laughter, soft and distant. I grip the door handle of the evidence room and twist it. Locked. I punch the code, heard only by my own trembling. The door clicks open. Inside, the shelves of boxes stand silent, each labeled with case numbers that vanish like sand through fingers. I move to the tallest shelf and slide down the boxes one by one, searching for the one marked Emily Harris. My chest tightens. This is desperation, chasing ghosts in a maze of paper. I find it on the third try, an unremarkable cardboard box. I pull it down and open the lid. Inside lies a single item, the porcelain doll's head. My breath catches. It shouldn't be here. I watched my partner bag it last night and saw him put it in the duffel. How did it end up back in evidence? My hand trembles as I lift the doll's head. In the fluorescent glare, its chipped paint reveals cracks that look like a spider's web. I whisper, "Emily?" And the doll's head seems to tilt. A soft sigh brushes past my ear. I spin around. The corridor is empty. The sigh becomes a whisper, and I recognize the voice before I see her. "You can't save them," she says, stepping from the shadows into the flickering light. Her coat torn, eyes hollow, hair dripping rain. The woman from the highway. Jane Doe. She stands in my precinct, wearing my nightmare. Rain beads off her sleeves onto the concrete. She tilts her head, as if studying me for the first time. "Blood ties them," she repeats, voice low and calm. "And blood sets them free." I raise my gun, but the stock feels like rubber in my grip. She steps forward, and I hear the same soft cackle I recorded on tape. My knees buckle. I want to run, back to the safety of fluorescent hum, of locked cells, of protocol. But my boots are glued to the floor. She reaches out, pale fingers brushing the doll's head in my hand. Her smile is crooked, her eyes glinting with something that could be hope or hunger. Then she leans close, and I breathe her words as if they're my own. "You found the fracture," she says, voice barely above a breath. "Now you have to cross." I stagger back, heart pounding, the doll's head clattering to the floor. The porcelain cracks on impact, tiny shards scattering across the tiles, like stars scattering in space. She watches them, expression unreadable. "Now," she says, "make the choice." I raise my gun again. She tilts her head. Behind her, the corridor stretches into darkness. The only exit from this nightmare. I swallow, voice thick. "What do you want?" She picks up a piece of the doll's head, holding it like a fragile truth. "To remember," she whispers. "To be whole." Then she steps back, blends into the shadows, and disappears. leaving me alone with the shattered porcelain and the echo of her words. I stand there, rain dripping down my uniform, and realize the fracture has claimed this precinct too. And if I walk away now, I'll never know how deep it runs. The choice hangs in the silence. Step forward into the darkness, or lock the door and pretend it never happened. I drop to my knees, gather the shards, and press them to my chest like a heartbeat. My gun falls to the floor. I close my eyes, listening to the whisper of rain, the hum of light, the pulse of something beneath the concrete, and I make the choice. The world tilts, and I step across the line. I step forward into the corridor's yawning darkness, the precinct's fluorescent hum fading behind me like a dying heartbeat. Each footfall echoes against cinder-block walls streaked with shadow. The air tastes of ozone and damp concrete. My service weapon hangs limp in my right hand, its weight suddenly foreign in my grip. I pause beneath a flickering light, breathing in the hush, listening for any sign of her presence. There is only the distant drip of water and my own ragged pulse. The hallway stretches away, lined with closed doors. Records, storage, those that lead to offices I've walked past 1,000 times. But tonight, none of it feels familiar. I know she slipped through these walls on broken hinges of reality, tracing fractures I cannot see. The choice I made, crossing that threshold, brought me here, and now I must follow. I round the corner to the stairwell, heart threatening to burst. The steps groan under my weight. I descend, counting silently as I go, 20, 40, 60. The smell of mildew grows stronger, mixing with the faint metallic tang that always accompanies old building basements. At the bottom, a heavy gray door stands half open, light spilling through its crack. I push it wider and enter the undercroft. Rows of lockers soar into gloom. My flashlight beam cuts a narrow path, each locker's reflection distorted in puddles on the floor. I move between them, the beam dancing across peeling paint and forgotten graffiti. Initials carved in teenage bravado, date scrawls marking long-ago graduations. I search for the one that still holds her coat, the one where I'd stashed the duffel. My breath catches when I find it. Locker 217. The combination lock clicks as I spin the dial. When it opens, the duffel lies inside as I left it, coated in dust. I lift it gently, half expecting it to vanish at my touch. Instead, it's weighty, real. I unzip it and remove her coat first. It's colder than the air, as though it draws the warmth from my hands. As I slip it around my shoulders, the hood falls forward, shadows masking my face. I tug it up, and immediately I feel the static in the room, hair standing on end, a spark beneath my skin. I look up and notice the beam of flashlight I'd used to inspect the lockers is gone. I stand in total darkness, save for the cracks of light around the doorframe behind me. Seconds pass, and then I see her, faint silhouette at the edge of my vision. I turn, heart thudding, but see only darkness. The hush deepens. Then I hear it, a soft, rhythmic clicking, like her long nail tapping metal. I follow the sound to the far wall, where a small access panel stands slightly ajar. The clicking comes from within. My mind screams that I shouldn't, but my boots carry me forward. I reach for the panel's edge and slide it aside, revealing a narrow crawl space opening into blackness. A single braided rope of electrical wires snakes inside, humming with power. The clicking intensifies, soft, insistent, beckoning. My flashlight flickers back on as I dig it from my coat pocket, hands trembling. I step into the crawl space on my knees. The air is tight, suffocating, as though the walls are breathing. I bend forward, shining the light into the void. The clicking echoes all around, amplified by the metal studs and insulation. I see movement. A pale hand creeping along the inner wall, fingers scraping concrete. I swallow hard and extend my arm, pulling her coat's hood down to reveal her face. It glows in the beam. Hollow eyes, darkened at the edges as though smeared with soot. Her lips part, and she cocks her head, as if studying me. "You came," she whispers, voice softer than a sigh. "You crossed." I nod, though my throat is dry. I need to know why. She reaches out, grasping my wrist with surprising strength. I feel the cold seep through my skin. "Because the fracture calls," she says, and binds us to what we lost. The space behind me shudders, and a low rumble vibrates through the corridor. The hum of the precinct seems distant now, as though I'm poised between two worlds. I realize the crawl space is no mere service conduit. It's a threshold, an invitation. And if I step beyond, there's no turning back. I swallow and force the question, what will happen if I cross completely? Her eyes burn with a strange light. "Only truth," she says, "and only pain." I tighten my grip on the flashlight and rise, ignoring the ache in my knees. She releases my wrist and steps back into the shadowed maw. I hesitate at the threshold, heart pounding, remembering every interrogation room, silence, every whispered confession, every unresolved doubt I carry. This is the moment where all my years of hardened disbelief fracture. I take a deep breath and step forward into the darkness. The crawl space closes behind me with a click, swallowing the flashlight's beam. My pulse crashes in my ears as I plunge into blackness, the walls seeming to pulse around me. The temperature drops, and I feel her coat tighten, as though the fabric itself remembers what lies ahead. A dozen footsteps echo in the silence. My footsteps, my heartbeats. Her unseen footsteps behind me. Then I sense the presence at my back, her breath on my neck like a promise. The clicking returns, louder now, vibrating through my bones. I stumble forward through the crawl space, each breath a shard of ice in my lungs. The walls narrow until I can't stretch my arms out, and my flashlight beam dances across exposed pipes and torn insulation like a makeshift conductor in a ghost orchestra. The silence presses in so hard I swear I can hear my own blood thundering in my ears. Behind me, I feel, no, I know, she's there, but I don't dare stop to look. Every instinct screams to turn back, to run, to lock that door and forget this ever happened. But I keep going, because if I don't, I'll never know what she meant by blood-tying worlds together, by fractures that call out to be crossed. The narrow tunnel opens into a low-ceilinged chamber lit by an ethereal glow. It seems to breathe, walls undulating like living flesh, veins of rotten metal pulsing with something like memory. The air smells of iron and decay, but beneath it all is the faintest trace of something familiar. Rain on asphalt, the faint tinny echo of fluorescent lights. I realize abruptly this place is a warped mirror of the evidence room. The same metal table, the same cracked window, but warped, twisted, as though filtered through a dream broken in half. I step forward, boots echoing on the warped concrete. The table stands empty, but I know she'll appear. I approach it, and the light flares, then dims, flickers in time with my heartbeat. I steady the flashlight, aiming it at the far wall, where shadows coil like living ink. A shape emerges. Hers. Not quite human, but closer now than at any other moment. Her coat hangs from her shoulders like wet moss. Her hair clings in dark strands across her face. She's beautiful in a way that should be wrong. Eyes dark wells reflecting my flashlight beam back into my chest. She tilts her head. "You came," she says again, softer this time. Not an accusation now, but a greeting. I swallow, reaching out, but my hand trembles so fiercely the light shivers into flickers. "Why did you lead me here?" My voice cracks. I step to the edge of the table, leaning until my reflection in the warped window stretches into a grotesque grin I don't recognize. She moves, steps onto the table, porcelain doll's head in her hand, cracks glinting where the shattered edges catch the glow. "To show you what lies beneath the surface," she whispers, placing the doll head on the metal with reverence. "Under every report, under every file, there is loss. Blood, our oldest ledger." She traces a finger along the doll's cracked eye socket. "This belonged to Emily Harris. Her world fractured the night she vanished, but she didn't remain on that side." My stomach twists. "She crossed, like you said?" She smiles, a small, sad curving of lips. "Yes." Her eyes lock onto mine, cold, searching, and I bring them back. Her voice rises, transforms the warped chamber. The walls pulse faster, veins of metal throbbing. The doll's head tilts on its own, rolling toward the edge of the table. She watches it drop, then places a hand on my chest, and the world shifts. I flash with memories not my own. Emily's laughter in a backyard under a sun with drooping rays. The scream of a child lost in a crowd. The hush of dawn, parents calling her name into empty air. My eyes sting with tears I didn't know I could shed. She steps off the table, filling the chamber with her presence. "You feel them," she says. "Their tether breaks here, but I gather their fragments." She lifts the doll's head, shatters it further with her palm into uncountable porcelain shards. Each shard glows like ember in the gloom, levitating upward until they swirl around her head like a crown. "Pain and memory bound by blood," she murmurs, "and those who cross carry their burdens." I stagger back as the shards fall like rain. I catch one. It pulses beneath my fingertips like a heartbeat. Flashes of Emily's final moments flicker in my mind, a gust of wind overturning a blanket, a child's yelp, the darkness swallowing her small form. I gasp, pressing the shard to my chest. "Show me," I whisper. Her smile deepens. "You asked to cross," she says. She raises her arms and the chamber dissolves. I fall forward into blackness, tumbling through a tunnel of blood-red veins, each pulse sending waves of emotion crashing through me. Sorrow, terror, longing. My uniform is gone. I wear Emily's poncho, soaked in rain. I am her and not her, a split reflection screaming in two voices. I see faces morph in the walls, parents whose eyes trace every echo, officers reading files they won't write, ghosts without names. My panic spirals, but beneath it is clarity. This is the fracture, the space where worlds overlap, where memories bleed through. Then I'm back in the chamber, on my knees, shards scattered at my feet. She stands above me, eyes solemn. "You've seen," she says, voice hollow and compassionate all at once. "Now you understand." I look up, breathless, sweat mixing with tears. "What now?" I manage. She gestures to the cracked window. "You return. You write none of this, but you carry it." She steps through the glass as though it were water, limbs distorting, silhouette dissolving into the corridor beyond. The window cracks spread outward, jagged lines resembling branches. I rise, heart pounding, shards of porcelain crunching underfoot. I reach to steady the frame and suddenly feel I am not alone. Behind me, in the chamber's mirror image, stand dozens of Emily's fragments. Small hands pressed to the window, ghostly laughter in staccato bursts, eyes blinking in the faint glow. They hover, waiting for release. I drop to my knees, gathering shards with trembling hands. Each I tuck into my coat pocket, heavy with story. I know I cannot take them all, but I must bear witness. The chamber dissolves around me. The crawl space looms once more. Dull concrete, exposed studs. I scramble out, breath ragged, emerging into the undercroft where the lockers stand silent. The duffel lies empty, her coat and the doll's head gone. I press my hand to my chest, a shard burning cold against my vest. The storm above is silent now, the precinct lights dim to a hum. I walk back to the stairwell, each step echoing like a question. Which world am I in? I climb to the main floor, corridors untouched, as though no fracture ever occurred. The interrogation room door stands closed, oblivious. I push it open and step inside. The table and chairs are empty, the window cracked as I left it, but its surface is unbroken now. I set a single porcelain shard at its base, the one with Emily's sun and drooping rays etched into it. My pulse anchors me to this side, where reports are filed, where cases are closed, where protocol reigns. I brush away a drop of moisture from the shard and pick up my recorder. I thumb the record button, but before I speak, I hold the shard up to the microphone. The device hums, the shard's echo piercing the static. Then I press stop and tuck the recorder away. I leave the room without looking back, walking into the flickering fluorescent world, the hum a lullaby for the living. Outside, the sky is gray, the rain gone. My partner waits by the cruiser, coffee in hand. He sees the shard in my hand and doesn't ask. I slip it into my pocket and climb in. As we pull away, I stare at the precinct's windows, vacant eyes against a dull sky. I know fragments of another world rest in my coat pockets, and with them, I carry Emily's last question, the one she never spoke aloud. Where do you go, officer, when the fracture calls your name?